Good evening, dear listener. Tonight we embark on a journey unlike any other, stepping through the veil of time into a world where death walks the cobblestone streets and hope flickers like candlelight in the darkness. If you enjoy calm history like this, you can also listen on Spotify or explore history audiobooks on Audible. Both are linked in the description for you. I invite you to close your eyes and imagine waking up not as yourself, but as someone entirely different in a time when survival was never guaranteed. The morning light filters weakly through dirty glass, barely illuminating the cramped chamber where you find yourself awakening. Your body feels different, unfamiliar. The rough woolen dress clinging to your frame tells a story you're only beginning to understand. You are Margaret, a baker's daughter in the year 1348, and outside your window, the city of Winchester is slowly dying. The first sensation that hits you isn't the ache in your back from the straw mattress or the chill seeping through the wooden shutters. It's the smell. Sweet decay mingles with burning herbs and human waste, creating an assault on your senses that makes your stomach lurch. This is the scent of a medieval city in the grip of the Black Death, and it will become as familiar to you as breathing. You swing your legs over the edge of the narrow bed, your bare feet touching cold stone. The chamber is small, perhaps 8 feet square, shared with your younger sister, who lies still beneath her threadbare blanket. For a terrifying moment, you wonder if she's simply sleeping, or if the pestilence has claimed another victim during the night. Relief floods through you as she stirs, coughing softly in her sleep. The wooden stairs creak ominously as you descend to the bakery below. Your father, Thomas, is already at work despite the early hour. His weathered hands knead dough with practiced efficiency, but you notice the tremor that wasn't there a month ago. The plague has aged everyone prematurely, stealing strength and certainty from even the most robust citizens. Your daily routine begins before dawn, as it has for the past 15 years of Margaret's life. The ovens must be lit, the dough prepared, and the day's bread baked before the morning customers arrive. But these are no ordinary times, and your customers are no ordinary people. They are survivors in a world where half the population has already perished. The bellows wheeze as you pump air into the oven's flames, watching the orange light dance across the soot-stained walls. Each loaf of bread you'll bake today represents more than sustenance. It's hope made tangible, proof that life continues even when death seems victorious. Your hands, now calloused and strong from years of labor, work automatically while your mind struggles to comprehend this new reality. The first customer arrives as the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows through the narrow windows. She's wrapped in a heavy cloak despite the season, her face partially hidden by cloth, meant to ward off the evil vapors that many believe carry the disease. Her coins clink on the wooden counter as she purchases her daily bread, but her eyes never meet yours. In a world where a cough can mean death, even the simplest human interactions have become fraught with fear. Margaret's memories flood your consciousness as you serve customer after customer. You remember when the streets were filled with merchants hawking their wares, children playing games in the squares, and the sound of laughter echoing from the taverns. Now, the city moves with the deliberate caution of prey animals, every person calculating the risk of each encounter. The bread sells quickly, despite the reduced population. Those who remain alive are desperate for normalcy, for the simple comfort of warm bread that speaks to life continuing, despite the devastation surrounding them. Your father counts the coins with satisfaction, but you see the worry lines etched deeper around his eyes each day. Business is good because competition has been eliminated by death, not because prosperity has returned. By midday, the heat from the ovens becomes oppressive, but you dare not open the windows wide. The city's air carries more than just unpleasant odors now. It carries whispers of contagion, rumors of new outbreaks, and the constant underlying fear that shapes every decision. You've learned to breathe shallowly when strangers approach, to keep your distance even from familiar faces. Your sister Emma descends the stairs, her pale face a constant reminder of how quickly health can deteriorate in these times. She's only 13, but her eyes hold the gravity of someone much older. The plague has stolen childhood from an entire generation, replacing innocent games with survival skills and carefree laughter with cautious whispers. The afternoon brings its own challenges as you venture into the streets to purchase flour from the miller. The cobblestones are uneven beneath your leather shoes, worn thin from daily use. Every step requires careful attention, not just to avoid stumbling, but to navigate around the human waste that flows in open channels down the centre of each street. Winchester's narrow lanes twist and turn like a maze designed by madmen. Buildings lean precariously toward each other, their upper stories nearly touching overhead, blocking out much of the precious sunlight. In this perpetual twilight, shadows hide both opportunity and danger. You've learned to walk quickly but quietly, drawing as little attention to yourself as possible. The marketplace that once bustled with activity now resembles a ghost town with scattered survivors. Vendors who remain alive charge premium prices for their goods, knowing that desperation makes people willing to pay almost anything for necessities. Your family's bakery provides some insulation from these inflated costs, but flour, salt, and other ingredients still require careful budgeting. The miller's shop stands at the edge of the city, where the plague's impact seems somehow less immediate. Perhaps it's the open spaces around the mill, or maybe it's simply that death feels less oppressive when you can see the horizon. The great wooden wheel turns slowly in the stream, grinding grain with the same methodical persistence that has sustained communities for generations. Your transaction with the miller is conducted with the formal politeness that has replaced genuine warmth in most social interactions. He measures your flour carefully, checking the weight twice before accepting payment. Trust has become a luxury few can afford when survival depends on every transaction being fair and accurate. The return journey to the bakery takes you past the cathedral, its towering spires reaching toward heaven like stone prayers for deliverance. The massive doors stand open, revealing flickering candles and the shadows of kneeling figures within. Some seek divine intervention for their own health, while others pray for the souls of those already lost. The constant murmur of Latin prayers creates a backdrop of desperate hope that follows you through the streets. Children are rare sights in these plague-ravaged streets, but when you do encounter them, their haunted expressions break your heart. They move with the careful wariness of adults, having learned too young that the world is dangerous and unpredictable. Their games, when they play at all, often involve elaborate rituals meant to ward off disease or honor the dead. Evening approaches with the same reluctant pace that characterizes all activities in this dying city. The sun sets early behind the tall buildings, plunging the streets into premature darkness that feels symbolic of the broader shadow cast over society. Candles and oil lamps begin flickering to life in windows, each small flame representing another household that has survived another day. Your family gathers for the evening meal, a simple affair of bread, cheese, and whatever vegetables remain fresh enough to eat safely. Conversation is subdued, focusing on practical matters rather than dreams or aspirations. The plague has taught everyone to live one day at a time, making long-term planning seem both pointless and dangerous. The bread you eat tastes different somehow, infused with the knowledge of how precious and precarious life has become. Each bite represents ingredients that were dangerous to obtain, fuel that was expensive to burn, and time that might have been better spent in isolation. Yet the act of eating together as a family provides comfort that transcends these practical concerns. Your father shares news gathered from customers throughout the day, carefully filtering information to protect Emma from the most disturbing details. Reports of new outbreaks in neighboring villages, stories of abandoned homes where entire families have perished, and rumors of miracle cures that invariably prove false. The flow of information in a medieval city relies entirely on human contact, making every piece of news potentially contaminated with more than just falsehood. As darkness settles fully over Winchester, you help prepare the bakery for tomorrow's work. Dough must be prepared and left to rise overnight, ovens banked to maintain proper temperature, and ingredients measured for the morning's baking. These routine tasks provide structure and purpose in a world where both have become increasingly scarce. The night sounds of the city tell their own story of survival and loss. Dogs bark in the distance, their owners long dead, but their loyalty persisting. Rats scurry through the walls with bold confidence, knowing that cats have become too valuable as plague fighters to spare for mere pest control. Occasionally, human voices drift through the darkness, usually carrying news too urgent to wait for daylight. Your chamber feels smaller tonight, perhaps because you're more aware of the walls that separate you from the dangerous world beyond. The straw mattress that seemed uncomfortable this morning now feels like a luxury compared to the alternatives facing those without shelter. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by sounds both real and imagined, dreams mixing with waking fears in ways that make rest elusive. Tomorrow will bring another day of survival in this plague-ridden medieval city, another test of endurance and adaptability in circumstances that would challenge anyone's resolve. The woman you've become, Margaret the baker's daughter, faces each dawn with a courage born of necessity and shaped by the terrible beauty of human persistence in the face of overwhelming odds. The pre-dawn hours stretch endlessly as you lie listening to the city's troubled breathing. Winchester never truly sleeps anymore, and neither do its surviving inhabitants. Your mind, still adjusting to Margaret's memories and instincts, processes the constant low-level anxiety that has become normal life. Every distant sound could signal danger. Every moment of silence might indicate something worse. When you finally rise again, your movements have acquired the careful deliberation that marks all plague survivors. Nothing is done hastily or carelessly anymore. You dress slowly, checking each piece of clothing for signs of wear that might expose skin to contaminated air. The woolen stockings, mended multiple times, still provide essential protection. Your kirtle, though faded from repeated washing with harsh lye soap, remains your primary defense against the elements and unseen threats. The bakery's familiar routine offers comfort, but today brings an unexpected complication. A knock at the shuttered window announces a customer before official opening time. Your father hesitates, hand frozen on the wooden bar that secures the entrance. Early customers often bring urgent news, and urgent news is rarely good news in these times. The visitor proves to be Master Geoffrey, a cloth merchant whose prosperity has somehow survived the economic collapse that claimed so many others. His request is unusual. He needs bread for a funeral feast, but not just any funeral. His wife has finally succumbed to the wasting illness that has consumed her for months, and he wants to honor her memory with a proper celebration of life rather than the hurried burials that have become commonplace. This commission requires more than your usual daily bread. Master Geoffrey describes elaborate loaves shaped like wheat sheaves, sweet cakes flavored with precious spices, and small individual portions that guests can take without sharing common serving pieces. The order represents both opportunity and challenge, requiring ingredients that are increasingly difficult to obtain and techniques that demand absolute precision. Your father accepts the commission with the grave formality that business transactions require in this new world. The payment offered would sustain your family for weeks, but the work must be completed within 2 days. This timeline means longer hours, higher temperatures in the bakery, and increased exposure to potential customers who might carry contagion. Every economic opportunity now comes weighted with survival calculations. The morning's regular customers seem different today, more hurried and nervous than usual. Fragments of conversation reveal the source of their anxiety. Reports have arrived from London describing a new variation of the pestilence, one that strikes more quickly and shows different symptoms. Whether these stories represent truth or the endless rumors that circulate like poisonous fog through medieval communities, they create palpable tension that affects everyone's behavior. Your sister Emma proves invaluable as you begin preparations for Master Geoffrey's elaborate order. Her small hands are perfect for shaping delicate decorative elements, and her artistic eye helps create patterns that transform simple bread into something approaching art. Working together provides a welcome distraction from the grim realities surrounding your daily existence, allowing both of you to focus on creation rather than survival. The specialized ingredients required for the funeral feast necessitate another journey into Winchester's dangerous streets. This time, your destination is the spice merchant's stall near the cathedral, where exotic seasonings command prices that would have seemed impossible before the plague reduced supply chains to desperate improvisation. Cinnamon from distant lands, honey from local beekeepers who risk their lives tending hives, and salt preserved in carefully guarded stores all carry premium costs. The spice merchant, a wizened man whose survival seems miraculous given his advanced age, conducts business with the methodical care of someone who understands that mistakes can be fatal. His scales are checked twice for accuracy, his goods examined carefully for signs of contamination or adulteration. Trust may be scarce, but verification provides some measure of security in transactions where both parties risk exposure to disease. Your route home takes you past the city's main well, where a small crowd has gathered around a traveling preacher. His voice carries across the square as he delivers a sermon about divine judgment and earthly purification. Some listeners nod in agreement, finding comfort in explanations that make sense of senseless suffering. Others maintain the skeptical distance that experience has taught them to preserve around anyone claiming special knowledge about the plague's meaning or purpose. The preacher's message mingles hope with terror in equal measures, promising salvation for the faithful while warning of greater tribulations to come. His words reflect the spiritual confusion that grips communities where traditional religious explanations seem inadequate to explain the scale of devastation. Churches remain important gathering places, but their role has evolved from centers of celebration to repositories of grief and desperate prayer. Returning to the bakery, you discover that the afternoon has brought an unexpected visitor. Father Benedict from the local monastery stands in earnest conversation with your father, his brown robes marking him as one of the few religious figures still actively ministering to Winchester's surviving population. Many clergy have either fled to safer locations or succumbed to the plague themselves, making those who remain particularly valuable to their communities. Father Benedict's presence signals both honor and concern for your family. The monastery has noticed your consistent survival and continued productivity during these troubled times, marking you as potentially valuable allies in maintaining community stability. However, his visit also carries implicit expectations about charity and service that could strain your family's already limited resources. The priest's request proves both reasonable and challenging. The monastery seeks a regular supplier for their daily bread, offering steady payment in exchange for guaranteed delivery regardless of circumstances. This arrangement would provide economic security, but would also require maintaining production, even during the most dangerous periods of plague outbreak. Your father's acceptance commits the family to a level of exposure and responsibility that significantly increases both opportunity and risk. Evening preparations for the funeral feast consume every available moment and surface in the bakery. The elaborate loaves require careful timing to ensure they finish baking simultaneously, while the decorative elements demand constant attention to prevent burning or collapse. Your hands, already tired from the day's regular work, ache as you shape intricate patterns that must remain perfect despite the physical demands of prolonged labor. The heat from multiple ovens operating at capacity transforms the bakery into a furnace that rivals the legendary fires of purgatory, described in Father Benedict's sermons. Sweat drips constantly from your forehead, requiring frequent wiping to prevent contamination of the carefully prepared dough. Your woolen dress clings uncomfortably to your body, but removing layers would expose skin to potential burns from the oven's radiant heat. Your sister Emma's stamina proves remarkable, as she maintains focus on delicate detail work despite the oppressive conditions. Her youthful energy provides essential support for completing the elaborate order within the promised timeline, but you notice signs of fatigue that concern you. Dark circles under her eyes, and a persistent cough that might signal nothing more serious than flour dust in her lungs, or might indicate the beginning of something far worse. The night's work continues well past normal bedtime, illuminated by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across the bakery's walls. These moving patterns create an almost hypnotic atmosphere that helps maintain concentration during repetitive tasks. However, the extended exposure to lamp smoke adds another layer of irritation to eyes already strained by close work and excessive heat. Master Geoffrey's funeral feast represents more than a simple business transaction in this plague-ravaged world. It symbolizes the human desire to honor the dead with dignity and beauty, even when death has become commonplace and resources are scarce. Creating something beautiful for such a purpose provides meaning that transcends mere economic survival, connecting your work to the deeper human need for ritual and remembrance. The final loaves emerge from the ovens just as dawn begins to lighten the eastern sky, their golden crusts gleaming like treasures in the lamplight. Each piece represents hours of careful labor and precious ingredients transformed into something that will provide both nourishment and comfort to people gathering, to mourn and celebrate a life lost to the plague. Your exhaustion feels worthwhile when you survey the completed order arranged on wooden boards for delivery. Sleep becomes a luxury postponed as you prepare for another full day of regular bakery operations. The funeral feast order has been completed successfully, but your family's survival still depends on maintaining normal bread production for daily customers. Your father's weathered face shows pride in the night's accomplishment, but also concern about sustaining such intensive work periods without compromising health or safety. The early morning delivery to Master Geoffrey's household provides your first glimpse into how the wealthy attempt to maintain normalcy during these extraordinary times. His stone house, larger and more secure than most Winchester dwellings, shows signs of careful maintenance despite the general decay affecting the city. Servants still tend the grounds and maintain appearances, though their numbers have clearly been reduced by death or departure. Master Geoffrey's gratitude for your family's efforts carries genuine emotion that transcends the formal politeness typical of commercial relationships. His wife's death represents not just personal loss, but another severing of the social connections that once bound communities together. The funeral feast becomes an attempt to recreate, however briefly, the sense of shared celebration that made life meaningful before the plague transformed existence into mere survival. Your return journey through Winchester's morning streets reveals a city slowly awakening to another day of uncertainty and cautious hope. Vendors begin setting up their reduced stalls, customers emerge from homes to conduct essential business, and life continues its stubborn persistence despite overwhelming odds. The bread you carry for your own family's breakfast represents both sustenance and symbol of humanity's refusal to surrender to despair. The day ahead promises new challenges as regular customers expect their daily bread, while your family recovers from the previous night's intensive labor. Your hands, cramped and sore from hours of detailed work, must continue the essential tasks that maintain your family's survival. Each loaf, shaped and baked, becomes another small victory against the forces of chaos and death that threaten to overwhelm medieval life. Winchester's bells begin their daily calling, marking time in a world where each hour survived represents an achievement worthy of gratitude. The bronze voices carry across the city's narrow streets and crowded buildings, reaching into every corner where human life persists despite impossible odds. Their familiar rhythm provides comfort and continuity that helps anchor communities when everything else seems subject to sudden and devastating change. Change. The cathedral's morning prayers drift through your window as you begin another day's work. but today brings whispers of something that makes even hardened survivors pause in their daily routines. A merchant caravan has arrived from the Northern Territories, carrying tales that seem too fantastical for belief, yet too consistent to dismiss entirely. The merchants speak of villages where the dead walk again, not as blessed resurrections, but as something altogether more disturbing. Their accounts describe corpses rising from shallow graves, driven by an insatiable hunger that no earthly food can satisfy. Your rational mind rejects such impossibilities. But Margaret's memories contain folklore about restless spirits and unquiet graves that suddenly seem less like superstition and more like warning. Your father dismisses these stories with the weary skepticism of someone who has witnessed enough real horrors to have no patience for imaginary ones. Yet you notice how his hands shake slightly as he measures flour, and how his eyes dart toward the shuttered windows more frequently than usual. Even the most practical survivors have learned that in times like these, the line between possible and impossible becomes dangerously thin. The morning's customers arrive earlier than normal, their conversations filled with urgent speculation about the merchant's tales. Some speak of preparing additional defences against threats that conventional weapons cannot address. Others argue for immediate evacuation from Winchester, claiming that cities become death traps when supernatural forces join natural pestilence in devastating human communities. Your sister Emma listens to these discussions with the wide-eyed fascination of youth confronting concepts that exist beyond her experience. Her questions probe the boundaries between death and unlife, between Christian doctrine and pagan fears that Christianity never fully eliminated. You find yourself struggling to provide answers that offer comfort without encouraging dangerous curiosity about matters best left unexplored. The baker's routine continues despite mounting anxiety throughout the city. Dough rises according to natural laws that remain unchanged regardless of supernatural threats. Ovens heat to temperatures that transform grain into sustenance through processes perfected over generations of human ingenuity. These familiar tasks provide anchors of normality in circumstances that challenge every assumption about how the world operates. Yet even routine activities feel different when performed under the shadow of impossible possibilities. The bread you need might feed people who will face threats that no medieval mind was prepared to comprehend. The coins you accept in payment might soon become worthless if society collapses under pressures that exceed human understanding or endurance. Your afternoon journey to the miller's shop takes you past the city's outer defences, where you discover unusual activity among the guards. Additional sentries patrol the walls, their attention focused outward rather than on the usual concerns about bandits or enemy armies. Their weapons include items you don't immediately recognise, blessed objects provided by clergy who apparently take the merchant's warnings more seriously than they publicly acknowledge. The miller himself seems unusually talkative, sharing information about defensive preparations being undertaken throughout Winchester's surrounding countryside. Farmers have begun burning their dead rather than burying them, despite religious objections to cremation. Village priests have started blessing weapons with holy water and conducting rituals designed to prevent corpses from rising again. These precautions strike you as simultaneously ridiculous and terrifying. If respected community leaders consider such measures necessary, perhaps the merchant's tales contain enough truth to justify extraordinary responses. Your practical nature rebels against accepting supernatural explanations, but your survival instincts recognize that preparation for unlikely threats often proves wise in dangerous times. The return journey reveals Winchester transforming in subtle but unmistakable ways. Households that survived the plague through careful isolation now seem to be preparing for different kinds of siege. Windows that were merely shuttered against disease-carrying air are being reinforced with additional timber. Doors that provided adequate security against human threats are being reinforced with iron bars and blessed symbols. Children's games have evolved to incorporate elements from the merchant's stories, though their parents try to discourage such activities. Young voices can be heard chanting rhymes about keeping the dead in their graves and protecting the living from unnatural hunger. These innocent adaptations of adult fears demonstrate how quickly communities adjust their cultural practices when faced with new categories of threat. Your evening meal takes place in an atmosphere charged with unspoken anxieties that transform familiar foods into reminders of mortality. The bread tastes the same, but eating it becomes an act of defiance against forces that might make future meals impossible. Each bite represents continued commitment to life and normalcy, despite circumstances that challenge both survival and sanity. Your father shares additional information gathered from customers throughout the day, carefully filtering details to protect Emma from the most disturbing possibilities. Reports describe organized expeditions being planned to investigate the truth behind the merchant's claims. Professional soldiers, experienced clergy, and knowledgeable scholars are combining their expertise to confront threats that no single discipline understands completely. The cathedral's evening bells carry additional significance tonight, their bronze voices calling faithful believers to special prayers designed to strengthen spiritual defenses against supernatural assault. The Latin words drift through Winchester's streets like protective incantations, offering comfort to those who find security in religious ritual and divine protection. Your family's evening prayers acquire new urgency as you request protection not just from plague and earthly dangers, but from threats that exist beyond normal human experience. The familiar words feel insufficient for circumstances that medieval theology struggles to address adequately. Yet speaking them aloud provides comfort that transcends their literal meaning, connecting your household to generations of believers who face their own impossible challenges. Sleep becomes more elusive as your mind processes implications of the day's revelations. Margaret's memories contain enough folklore about restless dead to make the merchant's stories seem plausible, while your modern understanding rebels against accepting explanations that violate natural laws. This internal conflict creates cognitive dissonance that makes rest difficult despite physical exhaustion from intensive labor. The night sounds of Winchester carry additional layers of meaning as you listen for signs of unusual activity. Dogs bark with different urgency when sensing threats they cannot categorize. Cats behave strangely when confronting scents that trigger instinctive fears bred into their species over countless generations. Even rats seem more cautious in their nocturnal activities, as if sensing predators that operate according to unfamiliar rules. Your chamber feels simultaneously too small and too exposed as you contemplate threats that walls and doors might not effectively contain. The straw mattress that provided adequate comfort last night now seems inadequate protection against dangers that might not require physical entry to reach their victims. Your woolen blanket offers warmth but little security against fears that penetrate deeper than cold air. Dawn arrives with the same reluctant pace that characterizes all activities in plague-ravaged Winchester, but today brings additional weight of uncertainty about what challenges the coming hours might reveal. The morning light filtering through dirty glass seems dimmer somehow, as if even the sun struggles to illuminate a world where natural and supernatural horrors compete for dominance over human affairs. Your morning routine acquires new significance as each familiar task becomes potentially the last time you perform it, under circumstances that remain recognizably normal. Dressing in Margaret's woolen garments, descending the creaking stairs, lighting the ovens, and preparing dough all feel like acts of faith in the continuity of ordinary life despite extraordinary threats. The bakery's familiar smells of yeast and grain provide comfort that transcends their immediate sensory impact. These aromas connect your present circumstances to countless generations of bakers who face their own challenges while maintaining the essential human activity of transforming raw materials into sustenance. Their persistence through previous disasters offers hope for surviving current impossibilities. Your father's movements show the careful deliberation of someone who has decided to maintain normal routines, regardless of circumstances beyond his control. His weathered hands knead dough with the same practiced efficiency that sustained your family through the plague's worst periods. This determination to continue essential work provides stability that helps anchor your household against forces that threaten to sweep away everything familiar. The first customer arrives as shadows begin retreating before advancing daylight, her face showing the strain of sleepless hours spent contemplating threats that defy rational analysis. Her purchase of daily bread becomes an act of defiance against despair, a declaration that life must continue even when death takes forms that exceed human understanding. Her coins clink against the wooden counter with the same solid reality that grounds all commercial transactions in physical necessity. Winchester's narrow streets echo with the sounds of a community adapting to circumstances that challenge every assumption about survival in dangerous times. Hammers ring against metal as blacksmiths forge weapons designed for battles against enemies that conventional tactics cannot address. Voices chant prayers in languages both familiar and ancient, seeking divine intervention against threats that human wisdom cannot fully comprehend. The morning progresses with the relentless efficiency that characterizes medieval life, each hour bringing tasks that must be completed regardless of external circumstances. Bread must be baked, customers must be served, and families must be fed even when the world seems balanced on the edge of incomprehensible transformation. These obligations provide structure that helps maintain sanity during periods when reality itself appears subject to fundamental alteration. Your hands shape loaves with automatic precision, while your mind grapples with possibilities that stretch the boundaries of believable experience. Each piece of dough represents continued commitment to feeding people who might face challenges that no amount of nourishment can address effectively. Yet the act of creation remains meaningful, even when its ultimate purpose becomes questionable. The heat from multiple ovens creates an environment that feels increasingly oppressive as anxiety compounds physical discomfort. Sweat drips steadily despite the early hour, your body responding to stress that exceeds normal reactions to temperature and exertion. The woolen dress clings uncomfortably while providing essential protection against burns from equipment that operates according to principles more reliable than human judgment. Emma's assistance proves invaluable as you struggle to maintain productivity despite distraction from circumstances that demand constant attention to potential threats. Her youthful energy provides essential support for completing tasks that require sustained focus, even when concentration becomes difficult to maintain. Yet, you notice signs of strain in her pale face that concern you more than your own physical discomfort. The morning's bread emerges from ovens with the same golden perfection that has characterized your family's work for generations. But today, each loaf feels like a small miracle, accomplished despite impossible odds. Their familiar aroma provides comfort that transcends immediate circumstances, connecting present struggles to the continuity of human persistence through countless previous disasters. Customers continue arriving throughout the morning, their faces reflecting the same mixture of determination and fear that marks all survivors who refuse to surrender hope despite overwhelming challenges. Their conversations reveal a community mobilizing resources to confront threats that exceed individual capabilities, while maintaining essential activities that sustain collective survival. Each transaction becomes an act of mutual support that strengthens bonds between people facing unprecedented dangers together. Your midday meal consists of hard cheese and yesterday's bread, consumed while standing beside the ovens to maintain their heat for the afternoon's baking. The simple food tastes different today, each bite carrying the weight of uncertainty about how many more such meals you might share with your family. Emma sits quietly nearby, her young face etched with worries that no 13-year-old should bear. The afternoon brings disturbing news through your customers. Old Henrik, the cobbler whose shop sits near the city gates, reports seeing strange lights moving beyond Winchester's walls during the previous night. His weathered hands shake as he describes pale flames that danced above the ground without any apparent source, moving in patterns that suggested intelligence rather than natural phenomenon. Other patrons share similar accounts. The blacksmith's wife speaks of her chickens refusing to leave their coop, huddling together and making sounds she's never heard before. The tavern keeper mentions that his ale has begun souring faster than normal, developing an unpleasant metallic taste that makes even desperate customers reject their drinks. These seemingly unrelated incidents begin forming a pattern that chills your blood more effectively than Winchester's autumn air. Animals possess instincts that humans have forgotten, and their collective agitation suggests threats that your rational mind struggles to accept. The merchant's tales no longer seem like distant folklore, but immediate warnings about dangers approaching your community. Your father maintains his stoic demeanor while serving customers, but you catch him glancing repeatedly toward the shuttered windows as if expecting unwelcome visitors. His military service years ago taught him to recognize when circumstances shift from merely dangerous to genuinely catastrophic. The subtle changes in his posture and movements signal preparations for conflicts that conventional weapons might not resolve. The afternoon's flower delivery requires another journey through Winchester's increasingly tense streets. Your route takes you past the monastery, where you observe unusual activity among the brown-robed brothers. They're constructing additional barriers around their walls, not the simple fortifications designed to deter human raiders, but elaborate arrangements of blessed symbols and consecrated materials. Brother Francis, whom you've known since childhood, acknowledges your passing with a grave nod that confirms your worst suspicions. The church's response to the merchant's warnings extends beyond mere precaution into active preparation for supernatural warfare. Holy water is being prepared in unprecedented quantities, while ancient texts are being consulted for rituals long forgotten in more peaceful times. The miller's establishment shows similar signs of unusual preparation. Additional guards patrol the perimeter, their weapons gleaming with fresh applications of blessed oil. The great wheel continues its eternal rotation, grinding grain with mechanical persistence that provides reassurance about some things remaining constant despite extraordinary circumstances. Your transaction with the miller proceeds with the formal courtesy that has replaced casual conversation in these dangerous times. He weighs your flour with extra care, as if precise measurement might provide protection against imprecise threats. His eyes frequently dart toward the horizon, scanning for signs of approaching danger that conventional watchtowers might not detect. The return journey reveals Winchester's transformation accelerating beyond recognition. Households that survived the plague through careful isolation now implement additional protective measures designed for different categories of threat. Doorways display newly carved symbols whose meanings escape your understanding, but whose purpose seems clear enough. Children have disappeared entirely from the streets, their families keeping them safely indoors, despite the psychological costs of such confinement. The few adults you encounter move with the purposeful haste of people conducting essential business, while minimizing exposure to unknown dangers. Conversations occur in whispers, as if speaking loudly might attract unwanted attention from listeners who shouldn't exist. The bakery feels like a sanctuary when you finally return, its familiar warmth and comforting aromas providing temporary refuge from mounting anxieties. Yet even this safe space cannot entirely exclude the growing sense that Winchester itself might become indefensible against threats that operate according to rules no human authority understands or controls. Evening preparations for tomorrow's bread acquire additional significance as you realize that maintaining normal routines might become impossible if the merchant's warnings prove accurate. Each batch of dough prepared tonight could be the last produced under circumstances that remain recognizably ordinary. Your hands work automatically while your mind contemplates scenarios that challenge every assumption about survival and continuity. The heat from banked ovens feels more oppressive tonight, perhaps because anxiety amplifies every physical discomfort. Your woolen dress clings uncomfortably to skin damp with perspiration that reflects stress more than temperature. The familiar tasks of measuring ingredients and preparing workspace become more difficult when performed under emotional pressure that exceeds normal concerns about business success. Emma's assistance proves essential as you struggle to maintain focus despite distractions that seem to multiply with each passing hour. Her steady presence provides anchoring that helps counteract the disorienting effects of contemplating possibilities that exist beyond normal experience. Yet you notice how her hands tremble slightly when handling delicate work, revealing that she too feels the weight of approaching crisis. Your father shares information gathered from afternoon customers, carefully filtering details to protect Emma while ensuring that your family remains informed about developing situations. Reports describe organised patrols being established throughout Winchester's surrounding countryside, combining professional soldiers with clergy experienced in confronting supernatural threats. These defensive preparations strike you as simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. If respected authorities consider such measures necessary, the merchant's tales must contain sufficient truth to justify extraordinary responses. Your practical nature rebels against accepting supernatural explanations, but survival instincts recognize that preparation often determines outcomes when facing unknown dangers. The evening's bread emerges from ovens with the same golden perfection that has characterized your family's work throughout the plague years. But tonight, each loaf feels like a small victory against forces that threaten to destroy everything familiar. Their warm aroma fills the bakery with comfort that transcends immediate circumstances, connecting your current struggles to generations of bakers who persevered through their own impossible challenges. Customer conversations reveal a community mobilizing resources for confrontations that exceed individual capabilities, while maintaining essential activities that sustain collective survival. The butcher speaks of blessing his knives with holy water, while the carpenter describes reinforcing doors with consecrated iron. These preparations transform ordinary craftsmen into potential warriors against enemies that conventional tactics cannot address. Your family's evening meal proceeds in subdued atmosphere, charged with unspoken fears about what tomorrow might bring. The bread tastes familiar, yet somehow precious, each bite representing continued commitment to normal life, despite circumstances that challenge both sanity and survival. Your father's weathered face shows determination to protect his family regardless of costs that such protection might demand. The cathedral's evening bells carry additional weight tonight, their bronze voices calling believers to special prayers designed for extraordinary circumstances. The Latin words drift through Winchester's narrow streets like protective incantations, offering spiritual comfort to those who find security in religious ritual and divine intervention. Your family's prayers acquire new urgency as you request protection from threats that exist beyond normal human experience. The familiar words feel inadequate for circumstances that medieval theology struggles to address completely, yet speaking them provides comfort that transcends literal meaning. Each phrase connects your household to countless generations of believers who faced their own seemingly impossible challenges. Night falls with the gradual inevitability that has marked each day's end throughout your life, but tonight brings heightened awareness of sounds that might signal approaching danger. Winchester never truly sleeps anymore, its surviving inhabitants maintaining constant vigilance against threats both natural and supernatural. Every distant noise requires careful evaluation to determine whether immediate action might be necessary. Your chamber feels simultaneously too confining and too exposed as you contemplate threats that walls might not effectively contain. The straw mattress provides physical comfort but little psychological security against dangers that operate according to unfamiliar principles. Your woolen blanket offers warmth while failing to address fears that penetrate deeper than physical cold. Sleep becomes elusive as your mind processes implications that stretch beyond immediate survival concerns toward fundamental questions about reality itself. Margaret's memories contain folklore that suddenly seems more relevant than superstition, while your modern understanding struggles with concepts that violate natural laws. This internal conflict creates tension that makes rest nearly impossible, despite exhaustion from intensive labor. The night sounds of Winchester acquire new significance as you listen for signs that might indicate supernatural activity. Dogs bark with unusual patterns that suggest they're responding to stimuli beyond human perception. Cats move restlessly through shadows, their primitive instincts detecting threats that rational minds cannot categorize or comprehend. Even the wind carries different qualities tonight, seeming to whisper warnings in languages that predate human civilization. Tree branches scrape against shutters with rhythms that sound almost like deliberate communication, as if nature itself attempts to convey information about approaching dangers that exceed normal understanding. Your exhausted mind begins creating patterns from random sounds, transforming innocent noises into potential evidence of supernatural presence. Each creak of settling timber becomes footsteps of unwelcome visitors. Every gust of wind through narrow streets sounds like voices calling from realms that exist beyond mortal experience. Dawn approaches with reluctance that matches your own hesitation to face whatever challenges the new day might reveal. The gradual lightening of your chamber's darkness provides minimal comfort when daylight itself might expose threats that darkness mercifully concealed. Your body aches from tension maintained throughout sleepless hours, muscles cramped from unconscious preparations for dangers that conventional defenses cannot address. The morning routine begins with automatic movements that provide stability through their very familiarity. Dressing in Margaret's practical garments, descending creaking stairs, and lighting ovens all represent continued commitment to ordinary activities despite extraordinary circumstances. These simple tasks anchor your consciousness to recognizable reality when everything else seems subject to fundamental alteration. Your father's presence in the bakery provides reassurance that transcends words. His steady determination to maintain essential work, offering hope that normal life might continue despite impossible challenges. His weathered hands measure ingredients with the same precision that sustained your family through plague years, demonstrating faith in continuity that helps counteract mounting despair. The first customer arrives earlier than usual, her face showing strain of sleepless hours spent contemplating threats that defy rational analysis. Her purchase becomes an act of defiance against forces that seek to destroy community bonds through fear and isolation. The familiar exchange of bread for coins represents continued belief in social contracts that supernatural threats cannot automatically dissolve. Winchester's morning awakening reveals a city transformed by preparation for conflicts that exceed human experience while maintaining essential functions that sustain collective survival. Smoke rises from chimneys where families prepare morning meals, despite uncertainty about future opportunities for such ordinary activities. Church bells call faithful believers to prayers that acquire new significance when facing enemies that conventional weapons cannot touch. The day ahead promises challenges that will test every assumption about survival in circumstances where natural and supernatural dangers combine to threaten human civilization itself. Your hands begin shaping dough with movements that have become automatic through years of practice, creating sustenance for people who might soon face trials that no amount of nourishment can adequately address. Each loaf represents continued faith in tomorrow, despite today's overwhelming uncertainties, demonstrating human persistence that has sustained communities through countless previous disasters. The familiar rhythm of kneading and shaping provides comfort that transcends immediate circumstances, connecting present struggles to eternal cycles of creation that persist regardless of temporary chaos. The morning progresses with relentless efficiency that characterizes all medieval activities, each hour bringing obligations that must be fulfilled regardless of external circumstances that threaten to overwhelm human capabilities. Bread must be baked, customers must be served, and life must continue even when continuation itself becomes an act of courage rather than simple habit. Your afternoon customers bring increasingly disturbing reports from Winchester's outer districts. Martha, the weaver whose cottage sits near the old cemetery, speaks in hushed tones about graves that appear disturbed, despite the hard-packed earth that should prevent such disturbance. Her weathered hands shake as she describes mounds of soil scattered around headstones, as if something had clawed its way up from below rather than been buried down from above. The blacksmith arrives next, his massive frame somehow diminished by the fear etched across his soot-stained features. His forge has been burning continuously for 3 days, he explains, not to meet increased demand for horseshoes or farming tools, but to craft items whose purpose he barely understands. Local priests have commissioned iron crosses, blessed daggers, and chains sanctified with holy water, all designed for purposes that traditional metalworking never anticipated. Your sister Emma listens to these accounts with the wide-eyed fascination of youth encountering concepts beyond her sheltered experience. Her innocent questions probe the boundaries between life and death, between Christian doctrine and ancient fears that Christianity never fully eliminated from medieval consciousness. You find yourself struggling to provide explanations that offer comfort, without encouraging dangerous curiosity about matters that might be better left unexplored. The afternoon's routine tasks acquire new weight as you realize that maintaining normal activities might soon become impossible if the merchant's warnings prove accurate. Each customer served, each loaf sold, each familiar transaction becomes potentially the last conducted, under circumstances that remain recognizably ordinary. Your hands work automatically, while your mind processes scenarios that challenge every assumption about survival in dangerous times. A commotion outside interrupts your work as voices rise in urgent discussion near the market square. Through the slightly open shutters, you observe a crowd gathering around a figure you don't immediately recognize. The stranger wears travel-stained robes marked with symbols that seem to shift and change when viewed directly, creating optical illusions that make your eyes water and your head ache. This newcomer speaks with authority, born of witnessing events that defy conventional understanding. His voice carries across the square as he describes villages completely abandoned, their inhabitants vanished without trace or explanation. Homes stand empty, with meals still warm on tables, livestock wandering unattended, and churches whose bells ring themselves at midnight with no human hands to pull the ropes. More disturbing still are his accounts of travellers who encountered figures walking along country roads at impossible hours. These walkers move with purposeful determination, despite bearing obvious signs of death. Their pale flesh unmarked by decay, yet somehow wrong in ways that living eyes can immediately recognize. They seem drawn toward populated areas by a hunger that ordinary food cannot satisfy. Your father emerges from the bakery's rear chamber, where he's been consulting the family's carefully hoarded silver coins, calculating whether your accumulated savings might purchase passage to distant relatives in regions not yet touched by these supernatural threats. His weathered face shows the strain of impossible decisions, weighing known dangers against unknown territories where survival might prove equally challenging. The stranger's testimony continues with descriptions of defensive measures attempted by various communities, most proving ineffective against enemies that operate according to unfamiliar rules. Walls that stopped human raiders offer no protection against beings that can pass through solid barriers. Weapons blessed by local clergy sometimes succeed in turning back supernatural attackers, but only when wielded by individuals whose faith remains absolutely pure and unwavering. Emma's pale face grows even whiter as she processes implications of the stranger's words. Her 13 years have already witnessed more death and suffering than most people encounter in entire lifetimes, yet these new threats exceed even her expanded understanding of how cruel the world can become. Her small hand seeks yours, cold fingers grasping for comfort that you struggle to provide when your own courage wavers. The crowd's reaction, reveals a community divided between those who accept the stranger's testimony as truth requiring immediate action, and others who dismiss his accounts as elaborate fabrications designed to exploit vulnerable people during already difficult times. Arguments break out between neighbours who have survived plague years together, their unity fractured by disagreements about threats that conventional experience cannot evaluate. Your practical nature rebels against accepting explanations that violate natural laws, yet survival instincts recognize patterns in the stranger's descriptions that correlate with other disturbing reports circulating throughout Winchester. The accumulation of seemingly impossible accounts creates weight of evidence that becomes difficult to dismiss entirely, even when individual stories seem too fantastical for rational acceptance. The afternoon's remaining customers reflect the community's growing polarization, as some purchase extra bread for extended journeys to safer territories, while others buy only their usual daily portions, refusing to alter established routines based on unverified rumors. These divergent responses reveal how differently people process information that challenges their fundamental assumptions about reality and survival. Your evening preparations for tomorrow's baking acquire additional significance as you contemplate the possibility that normal business operations might become impossible if supernatural threats materialize as described. Each batch of dough prepared tonight could represent the final opportunity to maintain familiar routines before circumstances force radical adaptations to survival strategies that no medieval person was prepared to implement. The heat from banked ovens feels more oppressive tonight, perhaps because emotional stress amplifies every physical discomfort. Your woolen dress clings uncomfortably to skin damp with perspiration that reflects anxiety more than temperature. Simple tasks become more challenging when performed under psychological pressure that exceeds normal concerns about commercial success or family welfare. Emma's assistance proves essential as you struggle to maintain focus despite mental distractions that seem to multiply with each passing hour. Her steady presence provides emotional anchoring that helps counteract the disorienting effects of contemplating possibilities that exist beyond normal human experience. Yet you notice how her hands tremble when handling delicate work, revealing that she too feels the weight of approaching crisis. Your father shares additional information gathered from afternoon customers, carefully filtering details to protect Emma, while ensuring your family remains informed about developing situations that might require immediate responses. Reports describe organized expeditions being planned to investigate the truth behind supernatural claims, combining professional soldiers with clergy experienced in confronting threats that conventional military training cannot address. These defensive preparations strike you as simultaneously reassuring and terrifying in their implications. If respected community authorities consider such extraordinary measures necessary, the stranger's testimony must contain sufficient truth to justify responses that would seem ridiculous under normal circumstances. Your rational mind struggles with concepts that violate established understanding, while survival instincts recognize that preparation often determines outcomes when facing unknown dangers. The evening's bread emerges from ovens with familiar golden perfection that has characterized your family's work throughout plague years. But tonight, each loaf feels like a small miracle accomplished despite overwhelming odds. Their warm aroma fills the bakery with comfort that transcends immediate circumstances, connecting current struggles to generations of bakers who persevered through their own seemingly impossible challenges. Customer conversations reveal a community mobilizing resources for confrontations that exceed individual capabilities, while attempting to maintain essential activities that sustain collective survival. The tavern keeper mentions blessing his ale barrels with holy water, while the carpenter describes reinforcing doors with iron crosses and consecrated timber. These adaptations transform ordinary craftsmen into potential warriors against enemies that traditional tactics cannot effectively address. Night falls with gradual inevitability that has marked each day's end throughout your life, but tonight brings heightened awareness of sounds that might signal approaching supernatural activity. Winchester never truly sleeps during these plague years, its surviving inhabitants maintaining constant vigilance against threats both natural and otherworldly. Every distant noise requires careful evaluation to determine whether immediate defensive action might prove necessary. Your chamber feels simultaneously too confining and too exposed as you contemplate threats that conventional barriers might not effectively contain. The straw mattress provides physical comfort, but minimal psychological security against dangers that operate according to principles no human authority understands or controls. Your woolen blanket offers warmth while failing to address fears that penetrate deeper than physical cold or ordinary concerns about survival. Sleep becomes nearly impossible as your mind processes implications that extend beyond immediate survival toward fundamental questions about the nature of reality itself. Margaret's memories contain folklore about restless spirits and unquiet graves that suddenly seems more relevant than mere superstition, while your modern understanding struggles with concepts that violate natural laws governing life and death. The night sounds of Winchester require new layers of meaning as you listen for signs that might indicate supernatural presence among the familiar noises of a medieval city settling into uneasy rest. Dogs bark with unusual patterns that suggest they're responding to stimuli beyond human perception. Cats move restlessly through shadows, their primitive instincts detecting threats that rational minds cannot categorize or comprehend adequately. Even the wind carries different qualities tonight, seeming to whisper warnings in languages that predate human civilization, while carrying scents that don't correspond to any familiar source. Tree branches scrape against shutters with rhythms that sound almost like deliberate communication attempts, as if nature itself seeks to convey urgent information about approaching dangers that exceed normal understanding. Your exhausted mind begins creating patterns from random sounds, transforming innocent environmental noises into potential evidence of supernatural activity. Each creak of settling timber becomes possible footsteps of unwelcome visitors. Every gust of wind through narrow streets sounds like voices calling from realms that exist beyond mortal experience or comprehension. Dawn approaches with reluctance that matches your own hesitation to face whatever unprecedented challenges the new day might reveal. The gradual lightening of your chamber's darkness provides minimal comfort when daylight itself might expose threats that darkness mercifully concealed from human observation. Your body aches from tension maintained throughout sleepless hours, muscles cramped from unconscious preparations for conflicts that conventional defenses cannot address. The morning routine begins with automatic movements that provide psychological stability through their very familiarity and predictability. Dressing in Margaret's practical garments, descending creaking wooden stairs, and lighting ovens all represent continued commitment to ordinary activities, despite extraordinary circumstances that challenge every assumption about normal existence. Your father's presence in the bakery provides reassurance that transcends verbal communication, his steady determination to maintain essential work offering hope that recognizable life might continue despite impossible challenges that threaten to overwhelm human civilization. His weathered hands measure ingredients with the same mathematical precision that sustained your family through plague years, demonstrating faith in continuity that helps counteract mounting despair. The first customer arrives significantly earlier than usual, her face showing clear evidence of sleepless hours spent contemplating threats that defy rational analysis or conventional response. Her purchase of daily bread becomes an act of defiance against forces that seek to destroy community bonds through systematic cultivation of fear and social isolation. The familiar exchange of baked goods for copper coins represents continued belief in social contracts that supernatural threats cannot automatically dissolve. Winchester's morning awakening reveals a city transformed by preparation for conflicts that exceed normal human experience, while desperately attempting to maintain essential functions that sustain collective survival. Smoke rises from countless chimneys where families prepare morning meals, despite profound uncertainty about future opportunities for such ordinary domestic activities. Church bells call faithful believers to prayers that acquire unprecedented significance when facing enemies that conventional weapons cannot touch or traditional military strategies cannot defeat. Your hands begin shaping dough with movements that have become completely automatic through years of daily practice, creating sustenance for people who might soon face trials that no amount of physical nourishment can adequately address or prepare them for. Each loaf represents continued faith in tomorrow's existence, despite today's overwhelming uncertainties, demonstrating human persistence that has sustained communities through countless previous disasters throughout history. The morning progresses with relentless efficiency that characterizes all medieval activities, each hour bringing specific obligations that must be fulfilled regardless of external circumstances that threaten to overwhelm human capabilities entirely. Bread must be baked according to established schedules, customers must be served with traditional courtesy, and daily life must continue even when continuation itself becomes an act of courage rather than simple habit or routine expectation. Yet today brings subtle changes that distinguish this morning from all previous ones in your experience. Customers speak in hushed whispers about preparations they cannot fully explain, purchasing extra provisions for journeys they hope never to undertake. Their conversations reveal a community caught between denial and acceptance of possibilities that challenge every comfortable assumption about survival in familiar surroundings. The stranger from yesterday's market square appears at your counter as the morning light strengthens, his travel-stained robes now clearly visible in detail that makes you wish for continued shadows. The symbols embroidered along his sleeves seem to move independently of the fabric that bears them, creating visual distortions that make sustained observation physically uncomfortable and mentally disturbing. His request proves simple enough in its basic components, yet complex in its implications for your family's immediate future. He seeks provisions for a journey to distant monasteries, where ancient knowledge might provide guidance for confronting supernatural threats that exceed local expertise. His willingness to pay premium prices for travel bread suggests both desperation and access to resources that ordinary merchants rarely possess. Your father's response reveals careful calculation of risks and opportunities that extend beyond simple commercial considerations. Accepting this commission would provide significant income during uncertain times, but would also associate your family with activities that might attract unwanted attention from forces both natural and supernatural. The decision requires weighing immediate benefits against potential consequences that no one can accurately predict or control. Emma watches these negotiations with fascination that concerns you more than her obvious fear would. Her youthful curiosity about matters that adults struggle to comprehend represents dangers that extend beyond immediate physical threats to psychological and spiritual welfare. Some knowledge proves too dangerous for unprepared minds to process safely, regardless of intellectual capability or emotional maturity. The stranger's presence transforms your familiar bakery into a space where ordinary and extraordinary intersect in ways that make simple activities feel laden with significance that exceeds their apparent purpose. His very existence validates accounts that rational minds prefer to dismiss, forcing acknowledgement of realities that comfortable assumptions cannot accommodate or explain adequately. Your morning's work continues with mechanical precision that masks growing internal turmoil as you process implications of choices that must be made without sufficient information to ensure favorable outcomes. Each decision carries potential consequences that extend far beyond immediate circumstances, affecting not just your family's survival, but their fundamental relationship with forces that operate according to principles no human authority fully understands. The heat from multiple ovens creates an environment that feels increasingly oppressive, as psychological pressure compounds physical discomfort in ways that make concentration difficult to maintain. Simple tasks require extraordinary effort when performed under emotional stress that exceeds normal concerns about commercial success or family welfare during dangerous times. Your sister's steady assistance proves invaluable as you struggle to maintain productivity despite mental distractions that multiply with each new piece of disturbing information. Her reliable presence provides emotional stability that helps counteract the disorienting effects of contemplating scenarios that exist beyond conventional experience or preparation. The stranger's final request reveals the true purpose of his visit to your establishment. Beyond simple provisions for travel, he seeks information about local defensive preparations and community responses to supernatural threats that might affect broader regional strategies for confronting dangers that exceed individual capabilities. His questions probe the boundaries between public knowledge and private fears that families prefer to keep hidden from outside scrutiny. Your father's responses demonstrate the careful diplomacy required when dealing with individuals whose authority and intentions remain unclear despite their apparent expertise in matters that conventional wisdom cannot address. Providing too much information might compromise your family's security, while offering too little could miss opportunities for protection that such connections might provide during unprecedented challenges. The morning's final customers arrive with news that validates the stranger's warnings, while eliminating remaining hopes that supernatural threats might prove exaggerated or entirely fictional. Reports from Winchester's outer districts describe abandoned farmsteads where livestock wander unattended and crops rot unharvested, their owners vanished without explanation or trace of violent struggle. These accounts describe a pattern of disappearances that follows no recognizable logic based on wealth, social status, or defensive preparations. Entire families vanish simultaneously, leaving behind personal possessions and daily activities interrupted mid-task. Meals remain half-eaten on tables, tools lie abandoned in fields, and children's toys scatter in yards where no children play anymore. Most disturbing are reports of survivors who claim to have seen their missing neighbours walking along country roads during twilight hours, moving with purposeful determination despite obvious signs that they no longer belong among the living. These encounters describe figures whose appearance retains enough familiarity to be recognizable while displaying wrongness that living eyes immediately detect without being able to articulate the source of their discomfort. Your family's midday meal precedes an atmosphere charged with unspoken decisions about responses that must be made before circumstances eliminate remaining choices entirely. The bread tastes familiar, yet somehow precious, each bite representing continued commitment to normal existence, despite mounting evidence that normality itself might soon become impossible to maintain through conventional means. The afternoon brings additional visitors, whose presence confirms that Winchester's situation has attracted attention from authorities whose expertise extends beyond local knowledge or conventional responses to dangerous circumstances. These newcomers wear robes marked with symbols that identify them as members of religious orders specializing in confronting threats that ordinary clergy cannot address effectively without special training and preparation. Their questions probe your family's observations about supernatural activity, while offering guidance about protective measures that might prove effective against enemies that operate according to unfamiliar principles. Their advice includes practical recommendations about defensive preparations combined with spiritual practices, designed to strengthen resistance to influences that target human consciousness rather than physical bodies. These consultations reveal the extent to which supernatural threats have spread throughout the region, affecting communities that previously seemed isolated from such dangers by distance or defensive preparations. The pattern suggests coordinated activity rather than random manifestations, implying intelligence behind attacks that exceed simple predatory behavior or natural disaster responses. Your evening preparations for tomorrow's baking acquire urgency driven by recognition that normal business operations might become impossible if current trends continue developing at their present pace. Each batch of dough prepared tonight represents potentially final opportunities to maintain familiar routines before circumstances force radical adaptations to survival strategies that medieval communities were never designed to implement successfully. The familiar tasks of measuring ingredients and preparing workspace become more difficult when performed under emotional pressure that exceeds normal concerns about commercial success during economically challenging periods. Your hands shake slightly as you handle delicate preparations, physical manifestations of psychological stress that threatens to overwhelm practical capabilities essential for family survival. Emma's assistance proves absolutely essential as you struggle to maintain focus despite mental distractions that seem to multiply exponentially with each new piece of disturbing information about developing supernatural threats. Her steady presence provides emotional anchoring that helps counteract disorienting effects of contemplating possibilities that exist beyond normal human experience or adequate preparation. The evening's bread emerges from ovens with golden perfection that has characterized your family's work throughout the most challenging periods of plague years. But tonight, each loaf feels like a miracle accomplished against odds that continue escalating beyond reasonable human capacity to address through conventional means alone. Customer conversations reveal a community implementing defensive measures that combine traditional military preparations with spiritual practices designed for confronting enemies that conventional tactics cannot effectively engage. These adaptations transform ordinary citizens into potential warriors against threats that exceed normal understanding while maintaining essential activities that sustain collective survival during unprecedented challenges. Night approaches with the same gradual inevitability that has marked each day's conclusion throughout your life. But tonight brings awareness of sounds and shadows that might conceal dangers operating according to principles that no human authority fully understands or controls. Winchester's surviving inhabitants maintain vigilance that extends beyond normal concerns about human threats towards supernatural enemies whose capabilities remain largely unknown. Your chamber feels simultaneously confining and exposed as you contemplate threats that conventional barriers might prove completely ineffective against, while offering no alternative protection that medieval technology can provide. The straw mattress provides familiar physical comfort, while failing to address psychological insecurity about dangers that operate according to unfamiliar rules governing interaction between living and dead. Sleep becomes an impossible goal as your mind processes implications that extend beyond immediate survival concerns toward fundamental questions about reality itself and humanity's place within cosmic forces that exceed mortal comprehension. Margaret's memories contain folklore that suddenly seems more prophetic than superstitious, while your modern understanding struggles with concepts that violate established natural laws governing existence and mortality. The night sounds of Winchester acquire layers of meaning that transform familiar environmental noises into potential indicators of supernatural presence among ordinary sounds of a medieval city attempting to rest, despite circumstances that make peaceful sleep nearly impossible to achieve. Every sound requires careful analysis to distinguish between natural causes and possible evidence of threats that conventional defenses cannot address. Even familiar sounds carry new significance tonight, as you realize that the very act of listening has become a survival skill essential for detecting dangers that might approach without conventional warning signs or recognizable patterns of hostile activity that human experience has learned to identify and respond to effectively. Your exhausted mind finally surrenders to fitful sleep as the cathedral bells mark midnight. But rest brings no relief from the horrors that have taken root in Winchester. Dreams blend seamlessly with waking fears, creating a twilight consciousness where Margaret's memories of folklore and your modern understanding clash in ways that make peaceful rest impossible. The pre-dawn hours stretch endlessly as you drift between sleep and wakefulness, your body responding to sounds that might exist only in your imagination, or might herald the arrival of threats that daylight has thus far concealed. Each creak of settling timber sends jolts of adrenaline through your exhausted frame, while the distant barking of dogs creates patterns that seem almost like warnings transmitted through the darkness. When morning finally arrives, it brings no sense of relief or renewed hope. The pale light filtering through your chamber's dirty windows seems somehow dimmer than previous days, as if the sun itself struggles against forces that seek to drain light from the world. Your woolen dress feels heavier as you pull it over your trembling body, the familiar garment now seeming inadequate protection against dangers that conventional clothing cannot address. The descent to the bakery reveals changes that confirm your worst fears about Winchester's deteriorating situation. Your father stands motionless beside the cold ovens, his weathered face bearing an expression of defeat that you've never witnessed during even the darkest days of the plague. His hands, normally steady and sure in their work, shake visibly as he attempts to light the fires that should already be blazing. Emma sits huddled in the corner, her pale face streaked with tears that she makes no attempt to conceal. Her usual morning energy has vanished entirely, replaced by a hollow-eyed exhaustion that makes her appear decades older than her 13 years. The sight of your sister in such distress triggers protective instincts that override your own fear and confusion. Your father's explanation emerges in broken fragments as he struggles to find words adequate for describing the night's events. The sounds that disturbed your sleep were not imaginary manifestations of stress and fear, but actual disturbances that occurred throughout Winchester's narrow streets. Multiple households reported encounters with figures that moved through the darkness with purposeful intent despite bearing unmistakable signs of death. The baker's family 3 streets away has vanished entirely, their shop discovered standing open with bread still warm in the ovens and coins scattered across the counter, as if some transaction had been violently interrupted. No signs of struggle marked the scene. No blood stained the floors, but the complete absence of any living presence created an atmosphere of wrongness that made investigating authorities reluctant to remain long enough for thorough examination. Similar disappearances occurred throughout the night, following patterns that defy rational explanation, while creating undeniable evidence that supernatural threats have moved beyond rumor and speculation into immediate reality. Families that survived plague years through careful planning and mutual support have vanished without trace, leaving behind only empty homes and unanswered questions about forces that operate according to principles no human wisdom can comprehend. Your morning routine feels like an act of desperate defiance against circumstances that make normal activities seem pointless and potentially dangerous. The familiar tasks of lighting ovens and preparing dough require extraordinary effort when performed in atmosphere charged with fear that conventional work cannot address or alleviate through simple persistence and determination. The heat from reluctantly kindled fires provides minimal comfort against cold that seems to emanate from sources other than Winchester's autumn weather. Your hands shake as you measure ingredients with precision that has become automatic through years of practice. But today, even simple tasks demand conscious attention that exhaustion and stress make difficult to maintain consistently. Emma's assistance proves limited, as her own emotional state prevents focus on detailed work that requires steady hands and clear thinking. Her presence provides comfort through simple proximity, but her obvious distress adds another layer of worry to circumstances that already exceed your capacity for effective response or adequate protection of family welfare. The first customers arrive later than usual, their faces bearing expressions that confirm widespread knowledge of the night's supernatural activity throughout Winchester's surviving population. These hardy souls, who venture out despite obvious dangers, seek not just daily bread, but reassurance that some elements of normal life persist despite overwhelming evidence that familiar world is dissolving around them. Their conversations reveal a community teetering on the edge of complete social collapse, as traditional bonds of mutual support prove inadequate for confronting threats that exceed collective human capability. Neighbours who shared resources during plague years now regard each other with suspicion, born of uncertainty about whether familiar faces might conceal supernatural influences that conventional observation cannot detect. The morning's bread sales proceed with mechanical efficiency that masks growing recognition that commercial activities might soon become impossible if current trends continue developing at their present alarming pace. Each transaction could represent final opportunities to conduct normal business before circumstances force complete abandonment of familiar routines and defensive strategies. Your father's decision to continue baking despite deteriorating conditions reflects stubborn determination to maintain essential services that sustain community survival, while acknowledging that such persistence might prove futile against enemies that operate according to unfamiliar rules governing conflict between living and dead. His weathered hands work automatically, while his eyes constantly monitor approaches to the bakery for signs of unusual activity. The midday hours bring disturbing reports from customers brave enough to venture through Winchester's increasingly dangerous streets during daylight hours, when supernatural activity typically remains dormant. The cathedral's morning prayers were interrupted by incidents that forced evacuation of the sacred building, with witnesses describing manifestations that exceeded clerical expertise in confronting otherworldly threats. Father Benedict himself arrived at the bakery shortly after noon, his brown robes disheveled and his normally composed demeanor replaced by obvious agitation that speaks to encounters with forces beyond his theological training. His request for blessed bread reveals desperation that conventional religious practices cannot adequately address through traditional sacraments and established ritual procedures. The priest's account describes altar candles extinguishing themselves despite absence of wind or draft, while sacred vessels moved across stone surfaces without human contact or explanation that natural philosophy can provide. Most disturbing were sounds emanating from the crypt below the main sanctuary, voices speaking in languages that predated Christian presence in Winchester while conveying messages that living ears should never hear. These supernatural intrusions into consecrated space represent escalation of threats that eliminates remaining sanctuaries where Winchester's population might seek refuge from dangers that conventional defenses cannot repel. If churches provide no protection against enemies that violate sacred ground without apparent consequence, then nowhere within the city's walls offers adequate security for vulnerable human inhabitants. Your afternoon work proceeds under constant awareness that each hour might bring developments that force immediate flight from Winchester, despite lack of alternative destinations that promise greater safety from supernatural threats that appear to be spreading throughout the region. The bread you shape with trembling hands might feed people who will not survive another night in this cursed city. Emma's deteriorating condition becomes increasingly apparent as the day progresses, her pale complexion taking on greyish undertones that remind you uncomfortably of descriptions provided by witnesses to supernatural encounters. Her breathing sounds laboured despite absence of physical exertion, while her eyes seem to focus on things that your vision cannot detect or recognise. These symptoms could indicate simple exhaustion and stress resulting from exposure to circumstances that exceed any child's capacity for psychological adjustment, or they might herald something far worse that supernatural influences can inflict upon vulnerable minds, unprepared for contact with forces that exist beyond mortal comprehension. Your growing concern about Emma's welfare adds urgency to decisions about your family's immediate survival strategies. The afternoon's final customer proves to be the travelling stranger whose presence yesterday introduced supernatural elements into Winchester's previously manageable plague-related difficulties. His return confirms that the city's situation has attracted attention from authorities whose expertise extends beyond local knowledge, while suggesting that intervention might be possible if appropriate measures can be implemented quickly enough. His assessment of Winchester's deteriorating conditions validates your worst fears, while offering slim hope that evacuation might remain possible if undertaken immediately before supernatural forces complete whatever process has been developing throughout the region. His detailed knowledge of escape routes and safe destinations provides practical alternatives to remaining in a city that appears increasingly indefensible against otherworldly enemies. The stranger's offer to guide your family to distant monasteries, where protective measures have proven effective against supernatural threats, represents both opportunity and enormous risk that must be evaluated without adequate information about his true intentions or capabilities. His willingness to extend such assistance to relative strangers suggests either genuine humanitarian concern or hidden motives that might prove equally dangerous. Your father's response reveals internal struggle between protective instincts that demand action to ensure family safety and practical concerns about trusting individuals whose background and objectives remain largely unknown, despite their apparent expertise in matters that conventional wisdom cannot address adequately through normal channels of authority. Evening preparations acquire desperate urgency as recognition grows that tonight might represent final opportunities to escape Winchester before supernatural forces eliminate remaining possibilities for safe passage to locations that might offer better protection against enemies that operate according to principles no human knowledge fully understands or controls effectively. The familiar tasks of banking ovens and securing the bakery for night feel like funeral preparations as you acknowledge that tomorrow might never arrive for your family if they remain within Winchester's walls, when darkness brings renewed supernatural activity that exceeded previous nights in scope and intensity, according to witness accounts throughout the day. Emma's assistance proves minimal as her condition continues deteriorating in ways that make immediate departure seem essential for preventing permanent harm. That supernatural exposure might inflict upon developing minds unprepared for contact with forces that exist beyond normal human experience or adequate protection through conventional means alone. Your evening meal proceeds in silence, broken only by whispered discussions about preparations that must be completed within hours if your family intends to accept the stranger's guidance toward distant sanctuaries, where ancient knowledge might provide protection that Winchester's conventional defenses cannot offer against escalating supernatural threats. The bread tastes like ashes in your mouth as you contemplate abandoning everything familiar to venture into unknown territories where survival depends entirely upon trusting individuals whose true nature remains mysterious despite their apparent willingness to assist desperate families seeking refuge from dangers that exceed human capability to resist through normal means. Your father's final decision emerges after prolonged internal struggle between competing obligations to protect his family while maintaining essential services that support community survival during unprecedented challenges. His weathered face shows resignation mixed with determination as he acknowledges that staying means certain death while leaving offers uncertain hope for continued existence. The preparations begin immediately as your family gathers essential possessions that can be carried during forced march to distant locations, where protective measures have allegedly proven effective against supernatural enemies that conventional weapons cannot touch, or traditional military strategies cannot defeat through established tactical approaches. Emma's condition stabilizes slightly as departure plans take concrete form, suggesting that hope itself provides psychological medicine that counteracts some effects of supernatural exposure upon vulnerable minds, unprepared for contact with forces that exist beyond mortal comprehension or adequate protection through normal human institutions and established social structures. The stranger returns as darkness settles over Winchester, his presence confirming that guidance towards safer territories remains available despite deteriorating conditions that make such journeys increasingly dangerous. With each passing hour, that supernatural activity continues developing throughout the region, according to patterns that suggest coordinated intelligence behind seemingly random attacks. His detailed instructions about route selection and timing reveal extensive knowledge of supernatural behavior patterns that enables prediction of safe passage windows when otherworldly forces focus their attention elsewhere, leaving temporary opportunities for movement that conventional military intelligence could never provide or anticipate through normal reconnaissance methods. The final preparations proceed with mechanical efficiency, driven by recognition that hesitation might eliminate remaining chances for escape before supernatural forces complete whatever process has been consuming Winchester's population, through methods that leave no physical evidence, while achieving results that conventional warfare could never accomplish through direct assault. Your family's possessions reduce to bare essentials that can be carried during extended travel through territories where resupply opportunities remain uncertain, while supernatural threats might appear without warning in locations that seem safe according to conventional assessment of defensive advantages and strategic positioning for avoiding hostile contact. The bakery stands empty for the first time in generations as your family prepares to abandon everything familiar in desperate gamble that distant monasteries might provide protection that Winchester's walls cannot offer against enemies that operate according to principles no human authority fully understands or controls through established methods of defensive preparation. Emma's small hand grips yours with strength that belies her deteriorating physical condition, her touch providing comfort that transcends immediate circumstances while demonstrating courage that exceeds her years and experience with dangers that no child should face, regardless of historical period or social circumstances that shape individual survival challenges. Your father secures the bakery's entrance with prayers instead of simple locks, acknowledging that conventional security measures provide no protection against threats that can pass through solid barriers, while hoping that divine intervention might preserve family legacy until circumstances permit eventual return to familiar surroundings and established routines. The stranger's signal indicates that departure window has arrived as supernatural activity temporarily focuses elsewhere, providing brief opportunity for movement that must be utilized immediately before changing conditions eliminate possibilities for safe passage to distant locations where ancient knowledge allegedly offers protection against otherworldly enemies. Winchester's narrow streets stretch before your family like pathways into unknown future, where survival depends entirely upon maintaining faith that human persistence can overcome challenges that exceed normal capability while trusting strangers whose true nature remains mysterious despite apparent willingness to assist desperate families seeking refuge from supernatural threats. The first steps away from everything familiar feel like descent into abyss, where conventional understanding provides no guidance, while supernatural dangers lurk beyond every shadow. Yet continuing forward represents only remaining hope for preserving family unity against forces that seek to destroy human bonds through systematic cultivation of fear and isolation that conventional resistance cannot adequately address. The night air carries scents and sounds that seem different from Winchester's familiar atmosphere, suggesting that supernatural influence has already begun altering fundamental aspects of environment in ways that living senses can detect without being able to articulate sources of discomfort or wrongness that makes normal breathing feel like conscious effort, rather than automatic biological function. Your family's journey begins under starlight that seems dimmer than previous nights, as if celestial illumination struggles against forces that seek to drain light from the world, while human refugees venture forth into darkness that might conceal either salvation or destruction, depending upon choices that must be made without adequate information about consequences that extend beyond immediate survival concerns. The stranger leads with confidence that suggests extensive experience navigating territories where supernatural threats require constant vigilance, while conventional maps provide inadequate guidance for avoiding dangers that operate according to unfamiliar geographical principles that transform familiar landscapes into alien environments where normal navigation skills prove insufficient for ensuring safe passage. Each step forward represents commitment to unknown future, while simultaneously abandoning familiar past, where plague years had established routines that provided structure and meaning despite constant danger from disease that seemed manageable compared to supernatural threats that exceed human capability to understand or resist through conventional means available to medieval communities. The road ahead disappears into darkness that might conceal either refuge or additional perils that your family must confront without adequate preparation, while trusting guidance from individuals whose motivations remain unclear. Despite apparent expertise in matters that conventional wisdom cannot address through established channels of authority or traditional methods of protective preparation. Winchester's lights fade behind your family as the journey toward uncertain sanctuary begins in earnest, carrying hopes and fears into night that promises either salvation or destruction, depending upon factors that exceed human control, while supernatural forces continue their mysterious work according to principles that no mortal mind fully comprehends or adequately prepares to resist through available means. The medieval world transforms around your footsteps as familiar boundaries between possible and impossible dissolve under pressure from forces that operate according to rules that predate human civilization, while threatening to eliminate everything that makes existence meaningful for communities that depend upon shared understanding of reality's fundamental structure for maintaining social cohesion during challenging circumstances. Your family walks forward into darkness that might herald either dawn or eternal night, carrying precious cargo of human consciousness into uncertain future, where survival depends upon maintaining faith that persistence can overcome challenges that exceed normal capability, while supernatural enemies work to destroy everything that distinguishes living from dead in cosmic struggle, whose outcome remains unknown despite mounting evidence that familiar world approaches fundamental transformation. Transformation. The cathedral bells have fallen silent behind you, their bronze voices no longer marking time in a world where temporal boundaries have begun to dissolve. Your family moves through countryside that seems altered by more than simple distance from Winchester's walls. The very air feels thicker here, carrying odours that don't correspond to any familiar source while creating resistance that makes each breath require conscious effort. Emma's condition shows slight improvement as you progress away from the city's supernatural influences, her pale complexion gaining hints of colour that had been absent for days. Yet her recovery remains fragile, dependent upon maintaining distance from forces that seem to concentrate around populated areas where human consciousness provides fuel for otherworldly appetites that conventional understanding cannot adequately explain or predict. The stranger's pace never varies despite terrain that shifts between muddy tracks and rocky paths designed more for livestock than human travelers carrying essential possessions. His knowledge of route selection demonstrates familiarity with geographical features that maps never recorded, hidden ways that avoid population centers where supernatural activity has reached levels that make passage impossible for unprotected individuals. Your father's military experience proves valuable as he monitors approaches from all directions, while maintaining awareness of family members whose safety depends upon his ability to detect threats before they materialize into immediate danger. His weathered hands rest constantly near weapons blessed by Father Benedict, though their effectiveness against supernatural enemies remains untested and uncertain. The moonless night provides concealment that works both for and against your family's survival prospects. Darkness hides your movement from potential observers, while simultaneously obscuring hazards that daylight would reveal clearly. Every step requires careful placement to avoid stumbling over obstacles that could create noise, attracting unwanted attention from entities whose hearing exceeds normal human capabilities. Hours pass without conversation, as each family member focuses entirely upon maintaining pace that the stranger sets according to calculations that factor supernatural activity patterns into travel planning. His occasional gestures indicate direction changes or temporary halts that correspond to dangers your senses cannot detect, but his experience recognizes as significant threats requiring immediate avoidance measures. The landscape gradually transforms from familiar agricultural areas surrounding Winchester into wilder territories where human habitation becomes increasingly sparse. Abandoned farmsteads appear occasionally beside the path, their empty windows staring blindly across fields where crops rot unharvested and livestock wander without purpose or human guidance. These deserted homesteads tell stories of disappearances that followed patterns similar to Winchester's recent losses, suggesting that supernatural influences have spread throughout the region according to systematic progression rather than random manifestation. The scope of devastation exceeds anything plague years produced, eliminating entire communities without leaving physical evidence of violence or struggle. Your woolen dress catches on thorny bushes that seem to reach deliberately for passing travelers, requiring constant attention to avoid tears that would expose skin to night air that carries more than simple cold. The familiar garment provides psychological comfort through its connection to normal life, while offering minimal protection against environmental hazards that medieval clothing was never designed to address. Emma's small form struggles with terrain that challenges adult endurance, yet her determination exceeds physical limitations as she maintains pace that survival demands regardless of personal comfort or fatigue. Her youth provides resilience that helps counteract supernatural exposure's debilitating effects, while her innocence offers some protection against influences that target experienced minds through accumulated fears and sorrows. The stranger's occasional warnings about specific hazards reveal intimate knowledge of supernatural behavior patterns that enables prediction of dangerous encounters before they materialize into immediate threats. His expertise suggests either extensive personal experience with otherworldly forces or access to ancient knowledge that conventional education never provides to ordinary individuals. Dawn approaches with reluctance that seems to reflect cosmic struggle between light and darkness, where supernatural forces seek to extend night's dominion beyond natural boundaries. The gradual lightening of eastern horizon provides hope that daylight might restore some measure of safety from enemies that prefer darkness for conducting activities that violate natural order. Your family's first rest comes as sunrise transforms the landscape into recognizable countryside, where normal rules of survival might apply despite underlying supernatural corruption that affects even seemingly pristine natural environments. The stranger selects a defensive position that offers multiple escape routes while providing concealment from observers who might approach from any direction. The morning meal consists of bread baked in your family's ovens less than 12 hours earlier, yet it tastes like food from another lifetime. When normal concerns about commercial success and customer satisfaction seemed important compared to current focus on basic survival against enemies that conventional preparation cannot adequately address. Emma's appetite returns slowly as distance from Winchester reduces supernatural pressure that had been affecting her physical condition in ways that conventional medicine cannot diagnose or treat effectively. Her recovery provides evidence that escape was undertaken before permanent damage occurred, though complete healing might require reaching sanctuaries where protective measures offer more comprehensive defense. Your father shares the first substantial conversation since departure began, describing defensive preparations observed in communities that successfully resisted supernatural attack through combinations of military readiness and spiritual protection. These accounts provide hope that human resistance remains possible despite overwhelming odds against conventional forces facing otherworldly enemies. The stranger's detailed knowledge of successful defensive strategies reveals a network of communities that have developed effective responses to supernatural threats through cooperation between military authorities and religious institutions, whose expertise extends beyond normal clerical training. His information suggests that organized resistance exists despite apparent isolation of individual settlements. The day's travel proceeds through territories that show increasing signs of supernatural influence, despite distance from major population centers where such activity typically concentrates. Trees display unnatural growth patterns, while streams flow with currents that seem to move independently of gravitational forces that should determine water movement through familiar geographical features. Wildlife behavior provides constant indicators of supernatural presence, as animals demonstrate instinctive recognition of threats that human senses cannot detect directly. Birds avoid certain areas entirely, while forest creatures exhibit nervous behaviors that suggest awareness of predators whose nature exceeds normal biological categories that conventional observation can identify and classify. Your family's progress slows as terrain becomes more challenging, while requiring increased vigilance against hazards that combine natural obstacles with supernatural influences that make even simple navigation dangerous for travelers unprepared, for environments where conventional geographical knowledge provides inadequate guidance for ensuring safe passage. The afternoon brings encounters with other refugee families whose stories confirm that supernatural devastation has affected vast areas throughout the region according to patterns that suggest coordinated activity rather than random manifestations of otherworldly forces. These meetings provide opportunities for sharing information while creating risks that larger groups attract more attention from entities that hunt human prey. Emma's interaction with refugee children reveals psychological trauma that exceeds anything plague years produced among young survivors who witnessed death but retained hope for eventual recovery. These children display hollow-eyed expressions that suggest encounters with forces that damaged fundamental assumptions about reality's nature and humanity's place within cosmic order. The refugee accounts describe defensive measures that proved ineffective against supernatural enemies, whose capabilities exceed human understanding, while offering insights about tactics that might provide temporary protection for individuals willing to abandon conventional approaches to survival during extraordinary circumstances that demand radical adaptation of established strategies. Your evening camp occupies defensive position selected by the stranger according to criteria that factor supernatural activity patterns into site selection, while providing access to escape routes that might prove essential if otherworldly forces locate your group during vulnerable hours, when sleep reduces alertness necessary for detecting approaching threats. The night's preparation includes rituals that combine practical security measures with spiritual practices designed to strengthen resistance against influences that target human consciousness rather than physical bodies. These procedures reflect accumulated knowledge about supernatural warfare that conventional military training never addresses through established tactical instruction. Emma sleeps peacefully for the first time since Winchester's supernatural crisis began, her rest undisturbed by nightmares that had been plaguing her dreams with visions of things that living minds should never witness. Her improved condition provides evidence that distance from concentrated supernatural activity enables gradual recovery from exposure effects that might otherwise cause permanent psychological damage. Your father maintains watch throughout the night, while processing experiences that challenge every assumption about survival in dangerous environments where conventional military expertise provides inadequate preparation for confronting enemies that operate according to unfamiliar principles governing conflict between living and dead forces. The stranger's vigilance never wavers despite obvious exhaustion, from guiding refugee families through territories where supernatural threats require constant awareness of dangers that normal human senses cannot detect without assistance from individuals whose training extends beyond conventional knowledge about defensive preparation and tactical response to hostile encounters. The pre-dawn hours pass without incident. As your family rests in temporary safety, that distance from Winchester provides while remaining vulnerable to supernatural forces whose influence extends throughout the region, according to patterns that suggest systematic expansion of otherworldly control over territories that were previously safe for human habitation. Morning arrives with renewed hope that continued travel might lead to sanctuaries where ancient knowledge provides protection against supernatural enemies, whose capabilities exceed human resistance through conventional means, while offering possibilities for communities that combine spiritual defense with practical preparation for extraordinary circumstances. Your family's second day of travel begins with improved morale as Emma's recovery continues, while your father's military experience adapts to requirements for survival in environments where supernatural threats demand modifications of established tactical approaches to defensive planning and risk assessment during hazardous movement through hostile territory. The stranger's guidance proves increasingly valuable as terrain becomes more challenging, while supernatural influences create environmental hazards that conventional navigation skills cannot adequately address without assistance from individuals whose expertise encompasses knowledge that normal education never provides to ordinary travelers facing extraordinary circumstances. The road ahead stretches toward distant mountains, where monastic communities have allegedly developed effective responses to supernatural threats through combinations of ancient wisdom and practical adaptation that enables continued survival, despite challenges that have overwhelmed secular authorities throughout the region, according to refugee accounts gathered during previous encounters. Your family's journey continues through countryside that tells stories of supernatural devastation while offering hope that human persistence might overcome challenges that exceed normal capability through cooperation between individuals whose diverse skills complement each other during circumstances that demand radical departure from conventional approaches to survival planning. The medieval world transforms around your footsteps as familiar boundaries dissolve under pressure from forces that threaten to eliminate everything that makes existence meaningful, while your family carries precious cargo of human consciousness toward uncertain future, where faith in persistence provides only remaining defense against enemies whose true nature exceeds mortal comprehension. Each step forward represents commitment to survival, despite overwhelming odds, while simultaneously honoring those who perished in Winchester's supernatural catastrophe, through continued resistance against forces that seek to destroy human communities, through systematic cultivation of despair and isolation that conventional courage cannot adequately address without divine assistance. The path winds upward toward mountain sanctuaries, where ancient knowledge might provide answers that medieval wisdom cannot supply, while your family maintains hope that reaching such refuges will enable not just survival, but eventual understanding of cosmic forces that currently exceed human capability to comprehend or resist through available means. The mountain path narrows as your family climbs higher into terrain where ancient stones bear markings that predate any written language you recognize. These carved symbols seem to shift and change when observed directly, creating optical illusions that make your eyes water, while suggesting meanings that hover just beyond conscious understanding. The stranger traces certain marks with reverent fingers, his touch activating faint luminescence that provides guidance through passages where conventional landmarks offer no direction. Your father's breathing grows labored as altitude increases, his weathered frame struggling with exertion that combines physical demands with psychological stress, from constant vigilance against threats that might materialize without warning. His military training adapts slowly to requirements for survival in environments where supernatural influences make every decision potentially fatal, regardless of careful planning or tactical expertise. Emma's condition continues improving as distance from Winchester reduces supernatural pressure that had been systematically weakening her developing consciousness through exposure to forces that target vulnerable minds, unprepared for contact with otherworldly entities. Her recovery provides hope that permanent damage was avoided through timely evacuation from areas where concentrated supernatural activity threatens irreversible harm to human psychology. The landscape transforms dramatically as your ascent progresses through elevations, where normal vegetation gives way to plants that seem to glow with internal light sources that have no connection to solar illumination. These luminescent growths create an ethereal atmosphere that feels simultaneously beautiful and deeply unsettling, as if nature itself has been altered by proximity to powers that exist beyond conventional understanding. Waterfalls cascade down rocky faces, with sounds that carry harmonics resembling distant voices, speaking in languages that predate human civilization, while conveying messages that living ears struggle to process without experiencing psychological distress. The musical quality of flowing water creates hypnotic effects that require conscious effort to resist, lest travelers become entranced by melodies that might lead them away from safe paths. Your woolen dress provides inadequate protection against mountain air that carries more than simple cold, its fabric unable to shield you from atmospheric pressures that seem to emanate from supernatural sources rather than natural weather patterns. Each breath requires deliberate effort, as if the very air resists human lungs while containing essences that don't belong in mortal respiratory systems. The stranger's pace adjusts to accommodate your family's limitations while maintaining progress toward destinations that must be reached before supernatural forces adapt their hunting patterns to include mountain territories, currently providing temporary refuge for human survivors. His knowledge of timing suggests intimate familiarity with otherworldly behavioral cycles that enables prediction of safe travel windows. Ancient ruins begin appearing along the path, Their weathered stones arranged in patterns that suggest architectural principles unknown to medieval builders, while serving purposes that conventional construction never attempts to achieve. These structures seem to resonate with energies that make nearby air vibrate with frequencies that human ears can barely detect, yet feel as physical sensations throughout their entire bodies. Emma points toward carvings that depict human figures, engaged in activities that seem to involve interaction with beings whose forms challenge artistic representation through conventional artistic techniques. The images suggest historical periods when contact between mortal and immortal realms occurred regularly, though the depicted outcomes appear ambiguous regarding whether such interactions proved beneficial or catastrophic for human participants. Your father examines defensive positions among the ruins, while noting architectural features that could provide protection against both conventional enemies and supernatural threats that might pursue refugee families into mountain territories. His tactical assessment reveals that ancient builders incorporated defensive principles that exceed medieval military engineering, while addressing categories of threats that normal fortress design never considers. The afternoon sun casts shadows that seem to move independently of their sources, creating optical effects that make accurate navigation increasingly difficult despite clear weather conditions that should enable straightforward passage through terrain that poses no obvious physical obstacles. These shadow movements suggest presence of entities that exist partially outside normal dimensional boundaries, while maintaining ability to influence physical environment. Wildlife encounters become increasingly strange as elevation increases, with creatures displaying behaviors that suggest awareness of supernatural influences, while adapting their survival strategies to accommodate threats that normal predator-prey relationships cannot explain through conventional biological principles. Birds fly in formations that seem designed to avoid invisible obstacles, while forest animals exhibit coordinated movements that imply communication about dangers human senses cannot detect. The stranger shares information about monastic communities that have survived supernatural threats through development of protective techniques combining ancient spiritual practices with practical defensive measures that secular authorities cannot replicate without extensive training in disciplines that conventional education never addresses. His descriptions suggest hope for finding sanctuary among people whose expertise encompasses knowledge that ordinary medieval communities lack. Evening Camp occupies a circular clearing surrounded by standing stones, whose arrangement creates geometric patterns that seem to focus environmental energies in ways that provide natural protection against supernatural intrusion. The stranger's selection of this location demonstrates understanding of geographical features that combine physical defensibility with metaphysical properties that enhance human resistance to otherworldly influences. Your family's evening meal tastes different at this elevation, as if mountain air alters flavor perception, while proximity to ancient sites affects even basic biological functions through mechanisms that conventional understanding cannot explain adequately. The bread from Winchester's ovens seems to carry memories of normal life that feel increasingly distant, despite having been baked only days earlier. Emma sleeps deeply within the stone circle's protective influence, her rest unmarked by the nightmares that had plagued her consciousness during Winchester's supernatural crisis. Her peaceful slumber provides evidence that certain geographical locations offer natural resistance to otherworldly forces that target human minds through manipulation of dream states and subconscious fears. The night passes without supernatural disturbance, as standing stones maintain protective barriers that prevent otherworldly entities from approaching close enough to threaten sleeping travelers whose vulnerability during unconscious hours normally provides opportunities for spiritual assault. The ancient builder's knowledge proves more effective than medieval defensive techniques for ensuring safety during rest periods. Your father's watch duty becomes less stressful within the stone circle's influence, allowing him to process recent experiences without constant vigilance against immediate threats, while maintaining awareness of approaching dangers that might overcome even ancient protective measures if supernatural forces concentrate sufficient attention on mountain territories. Dawn arrives with unusual clarity as mountain air provides visibility that extends far beyond normal human sight range, while revealing landscape features that seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The visual distortions create depth perception challenges that require careful attention during movement through terrain, where missteps might have consequences extending beyond simple physical injury. The stranger's morning preparations include rituals that acknowledge the protective spirits associated with ancient sites, while requesting continued safe passage through territories where human presence requires permission from entities whose nature transcends mortal comprehension. His reverent approach to such practices suggests genuine belief in supernatural forces that can provide assistance as well as pose threats. Your family's third day of travel begins with renewed confidence, as protective influences encountered among mountain ruins demonstrate that effective resistance against supernatural enemies remains possible through proper understanding of forces that medieval authorities typically dismiss as superstition or folklore. The knowledge preserved in ancient sites offers hope for communities willing to embrace practices that conventional wisdom considers obsolete. The path ahead leads toward higher elevations where monastic settlements have allegedly preserved knowledge that enables continued survival despite supernatural threats that have overwhelmed secular communities throughout the region. These destinations represent final refuge for families whose conventional homes no longer provide adequate protection against otherworldly enemies whose capabilities exceed human resistance through normal means. Emma's recovery accelerates as exposure to beneficial supernatural influences counteracts damage caused by malevolent forces encountered in Winchester's corrupted environment. Her improvement provides evidence that contact with otherworldly entities can heal as well as harm, depending upon the nature of forces involved and the circumstances surrounding such encounters. Your father adapts his tactical thinking to incorporate metaphysical considerations that military training never addressed, while maintaining practical focus on family protection through whatever means prove necessary for survival in environments where conventional strategies provide inadequate preparation for extraordinary challenges. His flexibility demonstrates veteran soldiers' ability to adjust methods according to changing battlefield conditions. The stranger's guidance becomes more detailed as your family approaches territories where his knowledge proves most valuable, sharing information about protective protocols that must be observed when entering sacred spaces where ancient powers maintain active influence over human activities. His instructions reveal complexity of supernatural interaction that requires careful preparation to avoid inadvertent violations of agreements between mortal and immortal realms. The morning progresses through landscapes that become increasingly otherworldly as elevation increases toward mountain peaks where natural and supernatural boundaries blur beyond conventional recognition. Trees grow in spirals that defy gravitational influence, while streams flow upward along rock faces, according to principles that contradict normal physical laws governing water movement. Your family's progress slows as terrain demands increased attention to footing, while requiring mental preparation for encounters with forces that operate according to unfamiliar rules, governing interaction between human consciousness and cosmic entities, whose nature exceeds mortal capacity for complete understanding. Each step forward represents commitment to trusting guidance from sources whose reliability cannot be verified through conventional means. The path winds through areas where reality seems more fluid than solid, creating environments where careful observation reveals multiple layers of existence occupying the same geographical space while remaining distinct enough to require different approaches for safe navigation. These dimensional complexities challenge assumptions about physical world's fundamental nature while demanding adaptation of survival strategies. Ancient markers become more frequent as your ascent continues toward elevations where human habitation requires cooperation with supernatural forces that claim territorial rights predating mortal civilization. The symbols carved into stone surfaces provide navigation guidance while serving as communication devices for entities whose language transcends verbal or written expression through conventional linguistic systems. your woolen dress proves increasingly inadequate for conditions that combine physical challenges with metaphysical pressures that affect human physiology through mechanisms that medieval medicine cannot diagnose or treat effectively. The familiar garment's limitations highlight how conventional preparation fails to address requirements for survival in environments where natural and supernatural forces merge beyond clear distinction. The stranger's warnings about specific hazards reveal intimate knowledge of supernatural territorial boundaries that must be respected to avoid confrontations that human capabilities cannot resolve through conventional diplomatic or military means. His expertise suggests extensive experience navigating political relationships between mortal communities and otherworldly entities, whose cooperation proves essential for continued human survival. Midday brings encounters with phenomena that challenge every assumption about reality's fundamental structure, as your family witnesses events that violate natural laws, while demonstrating intelligence behind supernatural manifestations that exceed random magical occurrence. These observations force recognition that otherworldly forces operate according to systematic principles that human minds can partially comprehend through careful study. The landscape reveals evidence of previous human habitation in areas where conventional settlement would seem impossible due to environmental conditions that combine extreme elevation with supernatural influences that typically prove hostile to mortal presence. These abandoned sites suggest historical periods when cooperation between human and otherworldly communities enabled coexistence that current circumstances have made increasingly difficult to maintain. Emma's questions about phenomena observed during the ascent reveal developing understanding of supernatural reality that combines childlike curiosity with mature recognition of forces that exceed normal human experience. Her adaptability demonstrates youth's advantage in accepting extraordinary circumstances without psychological resistance that adult minds typically exhibit when confronting concepts that challenge established worldviews. Your father's assessment of defensive positions adapts to include considerations about supernatural attack patterns while maintaining focus on conventional threats that might pursue refugee families into mountain territories where normal military advantages become irrelevant against enemies whose capabilities transcend physical limitations. His tactical flexibility proves essential for survival planning in extraordinary circumstances. The afternoon's travel takes your family through areas where atmospheric conditions create visual effects that make accurate distance estimation impossible, while suggesting presence of entities whose influence extends beyond immediate physical manifestation. The distorted perceptions require constant mental adjustment to maintain orientation toward destinations that might not exist in conventional geographical terms. Ancient pathways become visible as your elevation increases toward levels where human engineering merged with supernatural construction techniques to create transportation networks that serve purposes extending beyond simple movement between physical locations. These routes provide access to dimensional spaces that exist parallel to normal geographical features while maintaining connection to familiar territorial landmarks. The stranger's knowledge of proper protocols for utilizing ancient pathways reveals complexity of supernatural interaction that requires extensive preparation to avoid inadvertent violations of agreements governing human access to otherworldly transportation systems. His instructions demonstrate respect for entities whose cooperation enables continued progress toward monastic sanctuaries that provide refuge from supernatural threats. Evening approaches with atmospheric changes that signal proximity to destinations where human communities have successfully adapted to coexistence with supernatural forces through development of protective practices that combine spiritual discipline with practical defensive measures. The approaching sanctuary represents hope for families whose conventional homes no longer provide adequate security against otherworldly enemies. Your family's final camp, before reaching monastic territory, occupies a location selected for its proximity to beneficial supernatural influences, while maintaining defensive position against malevolent forces that might attempt final assault before refugees reach protected sanctuary. The site's selection demonstrates careful balance between accessibility and security that supernatural warfare demands. The night's preparation includes additional rituals that acknowledge approaching transition from refugee status to protect its sanctuary, while requesting continued divine protection during vulnerable period when changing circumstances might create opportunities for supernatural attack. These practices reflect accumulated wisdom about spiritual warfare that conventional military training never addresses through established tactical instruction. Emma's excitement about reaching sanctuary combines with lingering anxiety about supernatural forces that continue threatening human survival throughout the region, according to patterns that suggest systematic expansion of otherworldly control over territories previously safe for mortal habitation. Her emotional complexity reflects psychological adaptation to circumstances that no child should experience regardless of historical period. Your father's final watch before sanctuary maintains vigilance while processing experiences that have fundamentally altered his understanding of survival requirements in environments where supernatural threats demand modification of established military principles. His adaptation demonstrates veteran soldiers' ability to incorporate new tactical considerations while maintaining focus on family protection through whatever means prove necessary. The stranger's anticipation of reaching monastic territory reveals personal investment in your family's survival that extends beyond simple humanitarian assistance toward deeper commitment to preserving human communities against supernatural threats that seek to eliminate mortal consciousness from cosmic order. His dedication provides hope for continued cooperation between individuals whose diverse expertise enables collective resistance. Dawn breaks over mountain peaks that conceal monastic settlements, where ancient knowledge has preserved human communities through supernatural crises that overwhelmed secular authorities throughout medieval Europe. The approaching sanctuary represents culmination of journey that has transformed your family's understanding of survival while providing hope for future resistance against otherworldly enemies whose true nature exceeds conventional comprehension. Your family's final approach to sanctuary begins with renewed determination, as protective influences associated with monastic territory create atmospheric conditions that reduce supernatural pressure, while enabling gradual recovery from psychological trauma inflicted by exposure to malevolent forces. The beneficial environment provides immediate relief from constant vigilance that refugee existence demands. The path ahead leads toward communities where human persistence has successfully adapted to extraordinary circumstances through development of protective practices that combine ancient wisdom with practical innovation. These destinations offer not just temporary refuge, but permanent sanctuary for families, willing to embrace lifestyle modifications that enable continued survival, despite supernatural threats that conventional resistance cannot adequately address. The medieval world continues transforming around your footsteps, as familiar boundaries between possible and impossible dissolve under pressure from cosmic forces that challenge human understanding, while your family approaches sanctuary, where hope replaces despair through community cooperation with otherworldly entities whose assistance enables continued mortal existence within transformed reality. Each remaining step carries your family closer to refuge, where survival becomes possible through proper understanding of supernatural forces that currently exceed human capability to resist independently, while offering hope for eventual restoration of balance between mortal and immortal realms through cooperative effort that acknowledges mutual dependence within cosmic order. The monastery's bells begin ringing in the distance, their bronze voices carrying across mountain valleys with tones that seem designed to harmonize with supernatural frequencies, while calling both human refugees and otherworldly entities to peaceful coexistence within sacred territory where ancient agreements continue governing interaction between realms that conventional authority cannot regulate through normal legal or military means. Your journey approaches its destination as protective influences strengthen with proximity to sanctuary, where human communities have preserved essential knowledge about survival during supernatural crises, while maintaining hope for eventual resolution of cosmic conflicts that currently threaten mortal civilization throughout medieval Europe and beyond. The final mountain pass opens before your family as dawn illuminates monastic buildings whose architecture incorporates both human engineering and supernatural construction principles to create structures capable of providing genuine protection against otherworldly enemies while serving as bridges between mortal and immortal realms, where cooperation enables continued existence for both human and non-human consciousness within shared cosmic order. Cosmic order. The monastery gates stand open as your family approaches, their massive wooden doors carved with protective symbols that seem to pulse with gentle warmth rather than the cold luminescence you witnessed on the mountain path. Brother Thomas emerges from the shadows within, his weathered face bearing the serene expression of someone who has found peace, despite witnessing horrors that would shatter ordinary minds. His greeting carries genuine welcome mixed with practiced caution as he evaluates your family's condition for signs of supernatural contamination that might compromise the sanctuary's protective barriers. The examination proceeds with gentle efficiency, combining medical assessment with spiritual evaluation through techniques that blend healing knowledge with defensive necessity. Emma responds positively to the monastic environment immediately, her pale complexion gaining healthy colour, while her breathing becomes easier in atmosphere cleansed by generations of protective ritual. The child's rapid improvement demonstrates the monastery's effectiveness in counteracting supernatural influences that had been systematically weakening her developing consciousness. Your father's military bearing relaxes for the first time since leaving Winchester as he recognizes genuine security within walls that have successfully resisted otherworldly assault through methods that conventional fortification could never achieve. His weathered hands cease their constant readiness for weapons as protective influences eliminate immediate threat awareness that had become automatic response to supernatural danger. The monastery's interior reveals architecture that seamlessly blends human craftsmanship with otherworldly design principles, creating spaces that feel simultaneously familiar and transcendent. Corridors extend beyond apparent physical boundaries while maintaining comfortable proportions that accommodate normal human movement without creating claustrophobic restrictions or overwhelming vastness. Brother Thomas explains the community's history through carefully chosen words that convey essential information, while avoiding details that might disturb newcomers unprepared for complete understanding of supernatural realities. His account describes centuries of gradual adaptation to coexistence with forces that secular authorities typically refuse to acknowledge or attempt to comprehend. The refectory provides your family's first proper meal since fleeing Winchester, with food prepared according to recipes that incorporate ingredients blessed through rituals designed to strengthen human resistance to otherworldly influence. The simple fare tastes extraordinary after days of travel rations, each bite providing nourishment that extends beyond physical sustenance towards spiritual restoration. Fellow refugees share tables with established monastery residents, their conversations revealing diverse backgrounds, united by common experience of supernatural displacement from conventional homes. These individuals demonstrate various stages of adaptation to sanctuary life, while maintaining hope for eventual return to normal existence once cosmic balance returns to affected territories. Brother Thomas guides your family toward quarters prepared for extended residence, explaining protocols that govern daily life within sanctuary walls while ensuring continued protection against supernatural threats that might test even ancient defenses. The accommodations provide privacy while maintaining connection to community activities that strengthen collective resistance. Your chamber overlooks gardens where plants grow according to principles that combine natural cultivation with supernatural enhancement, producing food and medicine that conventional agriculture could never achieve. The view provides psychological comfort through connection to growing things, while demonstrating humanity's capacity for adaptation to extraordinary circumstances through cooperative effort. Emma settles immediately into monastery routine, her youthful energy finding outlet in activities that combine practical education with spiritual training designed to strengthen natural defenses against otherworldly influence. Her rapid adaptation demonstrates childhood's advantage in accepting extraordinary circumstances without psychological resistance that adult minds typically exhibit. Your father meets with Brother Thomas and other monastery leaders to discuss defensive preparations that might benefit from his military experience, contributing practical knowledge to protective strategies that combine conventional tactics with supernatural countermeasures. His expertise proves valuable for communities whose security depends upon understanding both human and otherworldly threats. The monastery's library contains texts that preserve knowledge about supernatural phenomena through generations of careful observation and documentation by scholars whose dedication to truth exceeded concern for personal safety. These volumes provide insights about otherworldly behavior patterns that enable prediction of supernatural activity, while offering guidance for protective responses. Evening prayers acquire new significance as your family joins community worship that combines traditional Christian devotion with ancient practices designed to maintain harmony between human consciousness and cosmic forces, whose cooperation enables continued mortal existence. The ritual creates atmospheric conditions that strengthen protective barriers while providing spiritual comfort. Your first night within sanctuary walls passes peacefully as protective influences eliminate supernatural pressure that had been affecting sleep patterns since Winchester's crisis began. The monastery's defenses prove effective against nocturnal threats that typically target vulnerable human consciousness during unconscious hours when normal mental barriers operate at reduced effectiveness. Morning routines within sanctuary combine practical necessities with spiritual disciplines that maintain individual and collective resistance to supernatural corruption, while preserving human identity despite prolonged exposure to otherworldly influences. The structured activities provide psychological stability through familiar patterns adapted to extraordinary circumstances. Brother Thomas introduces your family to work assignments that contribute to monastery operations, while providing purposeful activity that counters psychological effects of displacement from normal social roles. The tasks combine practical utility with spiritual significance through understanding that meaningful labor strengthens human connection to cosmic order. Emma joins younger sanctuary residents in educational activities that prepare children for life within transformed reality where supernatural influences require constant awareness while maintaining hope for eventual restoration of normal circumstances. Her integration with other young refugees demonstrates resilience that enables rapid adaptation to community structures. Your father assumes responsibilities that utilize military experience for sanctuary defense, while learning techniques that combine conventional tactics with supernatural countermeasures. His training adapts to requirements for protecting community against threats that exceed normal human capability while maintaining readiness for conventional dangers. The monastery's workshops produce goods that serve both practical needs and protective functions, creating items blessed through rituals that enhance their effectiveness against supernatural threats while maintaining utility for normal human activities. These products demonstrate successful integration of otherworldly knowledge with conventional craftsmanship. Daily life within sanctuary establishes rhythms that provide psychological stability while maintaining vigilance against supernatural threats that continue affecting territories beyond protective barriers. The routine creates a sense of normalcy within extraordinary circumstances while preserving community identity despite fundamental changes in survival requirements. Weeks pass as your family adapts to monastery life while processing traumatic experiences through counseling that combines practical psychology with spiritual guidance, designed to heal damage inflicted by supernatural exposure. The therapeutic approach addresses both immediate symptoms and underlying spiritual wounds that otherworldly contact can create. Emma flourishes within sanctuary environment as protective influences enable complete recovery from supernatural contamination, while educational opportunities provide knowledge that strengthens natural defenses against future otherworldly threats. Her transformation demonstrates healing potential available within properly protected communities. Your father's integration into monastery defense systems proves valuable for community security while providing purposeful activity that utilizes military skills in service of collective survival. His contribution strengthens protective capabilities while enabling personal healing through meaningful engagement with defensive responsibilities. The monastery's seasonal cycles continue according to natural rhythms enhanced by spiritual practices that maintain harmony between human activities and cosmic forces whose cooperation enables continued sanctuary effectiveness. These observances provide connection to eternal patterns while adapting to current supernatural realities. Your family's adaptation to sanctuary life demonstrates human capacity for adjustment to extraordinary circumstances, while maintaining essential identity characteristics that define individual personality within community structures. The process proves that survival remains possible through proper understanding of supernatural forces combined with practical defensive measures. Fellow refugees share stories that reveal widespread supernatural devastation throughout medieval Europe, while providing information about other sanctuary communities where human survival continues through similar adaptive strategies. These accounts suggest organized resistance network that maintains hope for eventual restoration of normal circumstances. Brother Thomas explains advanced protective techniques available to individuals whose spiritual development enables deeper cooperation with beneficial supernatural forces while maintaining human identity within cosmic order. These practices offer enhanced security against otherworldly threats while preserving essential mortal consciousness characteristics. The monastery's success in maintaining human community despite supernatural threats demonstrates that coexistence remains possible through proper understanding of otherworldly forces combined with appropriate defensive measures. The sanctuary provides model for survival strategies that might prove effective in other locations where similar protective conditions can be established. Your family's future within sanctuary walls extends indefinitely as supernatural threats continue affecting territories beyond monastery protection, while internal conditions enable normal life activities within extraordinary circumstances. The arrangement provides security while maintaining hope for eventual return to conventional existence once cosmic balance returns. The medieval world continues transforming beyond sanctuary walls as supernatural influences expand throughout regions where human communities lack adequate protection against otherworldly threats. Yet within monastery boundaries, life persists according to patterns that combine ancient wisdom with practical innovation to preserve human consciousness despite cosmic upheaval. Emma's laughter echoes through monastery corridors as childhood resilience enables complete recovery from traumatic experiences, while educational opportunities prepare her for life within transformed reality. Her healing provides hope for other young refugees whose adaptation to sanctuary life enables continued growth despite extraordinary circumstances. Your father's contentment with defensive responsibilities demonstrates veteran soldiers' satisfaction with meaningful service, while his tactical expertise contributes to community security against threats that exceed conventional military preparation. His integration proves that purpose remains available even when familiar structures dissolve. The monastery bells continue marking time according to eternal rhythms, while your family settles into routines that provide stability within extraordinary circumstances. Their bronze voices carry across mountain valleys with tones that harmonize supernatural frequencies, while calling both human and otherworldly entities to peaceful coexistence within sacred territory where ancient agreements govern interaction between mortal and immortal realms. As autumn deepens into winter, your family has found not just refuge, but genuine home within sanctuary walls, where human community persists, despite cosmic forces that threaten mortal civilization throughout medieval Europe. The monastery provides demonstration that survival remains possible through proper understanding of supernatural realities, combined with collective dedication to preserving essential human values within transformed world. The bells ring vespers as another day concludes in safety, their familiar rhythm connecting present sanctuary to eternal patterns that transcend immediate supernatural crisis, while promising that human consciousness will endure regardless of cosmic changes that currently challenge conventional understanding of reality's fundamental nature. Nature, And so, our journey through the plague-ridden streets of medieval Winchester draws to a close. Though Margaret's story continues within the sanctuary walls, where ancient wisdom meets desperate necessity. We've walked beside her through cobblestone streets, thick with death's perfume, felt the weight of supernatural dread pressing against shuttered windows, and witnessed humanity's stubborn persistence in the face of forces that defy comprehension. From the simple act of kneading dough in a plague-ravaged bakery to fleeing through mountain passes, where reality itself seemed negotiable, Margaret's experience reveals the extraordinary courage required for ordinary survival when the world transforms beyond recognition. Her journey from baker's daughter to monastery refugee demonstrates how quickly familiar certainties can dissolve, forcing adaptation to circumstances that no medieval mind was prepared to comprehend. The monastery bells that now mark her days carry the same bronze voice as Winchester's cathedral, yet their meaning has transformed completely. Where once they called believers to routine prayers, they now herald successful cooperation between mortal and immortal realms, in a world where such partnerships have become essential for continued human existence. Perhaps Margaret's story reminds us that survival often requires abandoning everything we think we know about how the world operates, embracing possibilities that challenge our deepest assumptions about reality itself. In times of crisis, whether supernatural or all too natural, our capacity for adaptation may prove our most valuable asset. The night grows deeper around us now, dear listener, and Winchester's empty streets echo only with memories of lives once lived. Yet somewhere in those mountain sanctuaries, human communities persist through wisdom both ancient and newly learned, proving that even when familiar worlds end, the story of human resilience continues. Until we meet again in these quiet hours, may your own refuge prove as secure as monastery walls, and may you never face choices as impossible as Margaret's. Sweet dreams, and remember that sometimes the most fantastic tales contain the most essential truths about what it truly means to survive.